Hello. Hello, hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog. And today we are reading His Last Vow by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, starting with The Adventure of the Red Circle. But first, I went to the library today and picked up Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. And I picked it up because it is the winner of the choices of the reader's choices for best nonfiction in 2022. I'm hoping to like it. The last two winners of readers' choices, I stopped reading. I DNF'd them. So I am really hoping to like it. I don't want to, like, these last books that I haven't gotten to be all ones that I don't enjoy enough to keep reading. I have no idea what it's about. No idea. The cover is red. That's all I can tell you. I think there's a heart on it. Literally all I can tell you. I only know that it's nonfiction and that people like it. Hopefully I will too. I also have to read another book. I shouldn't have told you because I immediately forgot the title, but it comes out in October, so it's an advanced copy that I was granted access to in exchange for an honest review, so we'll be reading that soon as well. Anything else? I'm still reading Astray by Emma Donoghue. I think that's it. Sip, sip, sip. Um, I think that's all the updates I got. I'm pretty boring today. Sorry to not have such an extravagant, exciting life to share with you. So, the plan is to read this. So, let's do it. So today the first story that we're starting with is The Adventure of the Red Circle. And I'm intrigued. I haven't heard of this one. I haven't heard of any of the ones that we've read so far. And I flipped ahead just to see if, like, oh, well, maybe I'll know some other ones. Of course I don't. I don't know any of these, which makes me excited. Like, one of them's called The Adventure of the Devil's Foot. I'm intrigued. You got me. You hooked me. You done hooked me. And then the last one is like the epilogue, and it's titled His Last Vow. So, shall we? Are we comfy? Are we cozy? Do we have a little snacky? Gotta take care of yourselves, my friends. Let's go ahead and get started. The Adventure of the Red Circle. Well, Mrs. Warren, I cannot see that you have any particular cause for uneasiness, nor do I understand why I, whose time is of some value, should interfere in the matter. I really have other things to engage me. So spoke Sherlock Holmes, and turned back to the great scrapbook in which he was arranging and indexing some of his recent material. Which I'm thinking there is another like book in this like collection, and it's the casebook of Sherlock Holmes, and that's what I think this is alluding to. So that's fun. A little Easter egg. But the landlady had the pertinacity and also the cunning of her sex. She held her ground firmly. "You arranged an affair for a lodger of mine last year," she said. "Mr. Fairdale Hobbs." "Ah, yes, a simple matter. But he would never cease talking of it, your kindness, sir, and the way in which you brought light into the darkness. I remembered his words when I was in doubt and darkness myself. I know you could, if you only would." Holmes was accessible upon the side of flattery, and also, to do him justice, upon the side of kindliness. The two forces made him lay down his gum brush with a sigh of resignation and push back his chair. Well, well, Mrs. Warren, let us hear about it, then. You don't object to tobacco, I take it. Thank you, Watson. The matches? You are uneasy, as I understand, because your new lodger remains in his room and you cannot see him. Why, bless you, Mrs. Warren, if I were your lodger, you would often not see me for weeks on end. No doubt, sir, but this is different. It frightens me, Mr. Holmes. I can't sleep for fright. To hear his quick step moving here and moving there from early morning to late at night, and yet never to catch so much as a glimpse of him. It's more than I can stand. My husband is as nervous over it as I am, but he is out at work today, while I get no rest from it. What is he hiding for? What has he done? Except for the girl, I am all alone in the house with him, and it's more than my nerves can stand. Holmes leaned forward and laid his long, thin fingers upon the woman's shoulder. He had an almost hypnotic power of soothing when he wished. The scared look faded from her eyes, and her agitated features smoothed into their usual commonplace. She sat down in the chair which he had indicated. "If I take it up, I must understand every detail," said he. "Take your time. The smallest point may be the most essential. You say that the man came 10 days ago and paid you for a fortnight's board and lodging." "He asked my terms, sir. I said 50 shillings a week. There's a small sitting room and bedroom, and all complete, at the top of the stairs." "Well?" "He said, 'I'll pay you £5 a week if I can have it on my own terms.' I'm a poor woman, sir, and Mr. Warren earns little, and the money meant much to me. He took out a £10 note, and he held it out to me right then and there. 'You can have the same every fortnight, for a long time to come, if you keep the terms,' he said. 'If not, I'll have no more to do with you.'" "What were the terms?" "Well, sir, they were that he was to have a key of the house. That was all right. Lodgers often have them. Also, that he was to be left entirely to himself, and never, upon any case, to be disturbed." "Nothing wonderful in that, surely." "Not in reason, sir. But this is out of all reason. He has been there for 10 days, and neither Mr. Warren nor I nor the girl has once set eyes upon him. We can hear that quick step of his pacing up and down, night and morning and noon, but except on that first night he has never once gone out of the house." "Oh, he went out that first night, did he?" "Yes, sir, and returned very late, after we were all in bed. He told me, after he had taken the rooms, that he would do so, and asked me not to bar the door. I heard him come up the stair after midnight." "But his meals?" "It was this particular direction, that we should always, when he rang, leave his meal upon a chair outside his door. Then he rings again when he has finished, and we take it down from the same chair. If he wants anything else, he prints it on a slip of paper, and leaves." "Prints it?" "Yes, sir, prints. Prints it in pencil. Just the word, nothing more. Here's one I brought to show you. Soap. Here's another. Match. This is when he left the first morning. Daily Gazette. I leave that paper with his breakfast every morning." "Dear me, Watson," said Holmes, staring with great curiosity at the slips of foolscap, which the landlady had handed to him. "This is certainly a little unusual. Seclusion I can understand, but why print? Printing is a clumsy process. Why not write? What would it suggest, Watson?" "That he desired to conceal his handwriting." "But why? What can it matter to him that his landlady should have a word of his writing? Still, it may be as you say. Then, again, why such laconic messages?" "I cannot imagine." "It opens a pleasing field for intelligent speculation. The words are written with a broad-pointed, violet-tinted pencil, of a not unusual pattern. You will observe that the paper is torn away at the side here after the printing was done, so that the S of soap is partially gone. Suggestive, Watson, is it not? Of caution? Exactly. There was evidently some mark, some thumbprint, something which might give a clue to the person's identity. Now, Mrs. Warren, you say that the man was of middle size, dark and bearded. What age would he be? Youngish, sir, not over 30. Well, can you give me no further indication? He spoke good English, sir. Quite the gentleman. Dark clothes, nothing you would note? He gave no name. No, sir. And has had no letters, no callers? None. But surely you or the girl enter his room of a morning? No, sir. He looks after himself entirely. Dear me, that is certainly remarkable. What about his luggage? He had one big brown bag with him. Nothing else. Well, we don't seem to have much material to help us. Do you say nothing has come out of that room? Absolutely nothing. He had one... Oh. The landlady drew an envelope from her bag. From it, she took out 2 burnt matches and a cigarette end upon the table. They were on his tray this morning. I brought them because I had heard that you can read great things out of something so small. Holmes shrugged his shoulders. There is nothing here, said he. The matches have, of course, been used to light cigarettes. That is obvious from the shortness of the burnt end. Half the match is consumed in lighting a pipe or cigar. But, dear me, this cigarette stub is certainly remarkable. The gentleman was bearded and mustached, you say? Yes, sir. I don't understand. I should say that only a clean-shaven man could have smoked this. Why, Watson, even your modest mustache would have been singed. A holder? I suggested. No, the end is matted. I suppose there could not be 2 people in your rooms, Mrs. Warren? No, sir. He eats so little that I often wonder it can keep life in one. Well, I think we must wait for a little more material. After all, you have nothing to complain of. You have received your rent, and he is not a troublesome lodger, though he is certainly an unusual one. He pays you well, and if he chooses to lie conceited, it is no direct business of yours. We have no excuse for an intrusion upon his privacy until we have some reason to think that there is a guilty reason for it. I've taken up the matter, and I won't lose sight of it. Report to me if anything fresh occurs, and rely upon my assistance if it should be needed. There was certainly some points of interest in the case, Watson, he remarked when the landlady had left us. It may, of course, be trivial, individual eccentricity, or it may be very much deeper than appears on the surface. The first thing that strikes one is the obvious possibility that the person now in the rooms may be entirely different from the one who engaged them. Why should you think so? Well, apart from his cigarette end, was it not suggestive that the only time the lodger went out was immediately after his taking the rooms? He came back, or someone came back, when all witnesses were out of the way. We have no proof that the person who came back was the person who went out. Then again, the man who took the rooms spoke English well. This other, however, prints match when it should have been matches. I can imagine that the word was taken out of a dictionary, which would give the noun, but not the plural. The laconic style may be to conceal the absence of knowledge of English. Yes, Watson, there are good reasons to suspect that there have been a substitution of lodgers. But for what possible end? Ah, there lies our problem. There is one rather obvious line of investigation. He took down the great book, in which, day by day, he filed the agony columns of the various London journals. Dear me, said he, turning over the pages, what a chorus of groans, cries, and bleatings! What a rag-bag of singular happenings! But surely the most valuable hunting ground that ever... was given to a student of the unusual. This person is alone and cannot be approached by letter without a breach of that absolute secrecy which is desired. How is any news or any message to reach him from without? Obviously, by advertisement through a newspaper. There seems no other way, and fortunately we need concern ourselves with the one paper only. Here are the Daily Gazette extracts of the last fortnight. Lady with a black boa at Prince's Skating Club. That we may pass. Surely Jimmy will not break his mother's heart. That appears to be irrelevant. If the lady who fainted is the Brixton bus, she does not interest me. Every day my heart longs. Bleat, Watson. Unmitigated bleat. Ah, this is a little more possible. Listen to me. Listen to this. Listen to me. Be patient. We'll find some sure means of communication. Meanwhile, this column. G. That is 2 days after Mrs. Warren's lodger arrived. It sounds plausible, does it not? The mysterious one could understand English, even if he could not print it. Let us see if we can pick up the trace again. Yes, here we are, 3 days later. Am making successful arrangements. Patience and prudence. The clouds will pass. G. Nothing for a week after that. Then comes something much more definite. The path is clearing. If I find chance signal message, remember code agreed. 1A, 2B, and so on. You will hear soon. G. That was in yesterday's paper, and there is nothing in today's. It's all very appropriate to Mrs. Warren's lodger. If we wait a while, Watson, I don't doubt that the affair will grow more intelligible. So it proved. For in the morning I found my friend standing on the hearthrug with his back to the fire and a smile of complete satisfaction upon his face. How's this, Watson? He cried, picking up the paper from the table. High red house with white stone facings, 3rd floor, 2nd window left, after dusk. G. That is definite enough. I think after breakfast we must make a little reconnaissance of Mrs. Warren's neighborhood. Ah, Mrs. Warren, what news do you bring us this morning? Our client had suddenly burst into the room with an explosive energy, which told of some new and momentous development. It's a police matter, Mr. Holmes, she cried. I've no more of it. He shall pack out of there with his baggage. I would have gone straight up and told him so, only I thought it was best. Only I thought it was but fair to you to take your opinion first. But I'm at the end of my patience, and when it comes to knocking Mr. Warren about, using him roughly, anyway. But who used him roughly? Ah, that's what we want to know. It was this morning, sir. Mr. Warren is a timekeeper at Morton and the Waylights, in Tottenham Court Road. He has to be out of the house before 7. Well, this morning he had gone 10 paces down the road when 2 men came up behind him, threw a coat over his head, and bundled him into a cab that was beside the curb. They drove him an hour, and then opened the door and shot him out. He lay in the roadway, so shaken in his wits that he never saw what became of the cab. When he picked himself up he found he was on the Hampstead Heath. So he took a bus home, and there he lies now on the sofa, while I came straight round to tell you what has happened. Most interesting, said Holmes. Did he observe the appearance of these men? Did he hear them talk? No, he is clean dazed. He just knows that he was lifted up as if by magic, and dropped as if by magic. 2 at least were in it. Maybe 3. And you connect this attack with your lodger? Well, we've lived here 15 years and no such happenings ever came before. I've had enough of him. Money's not everything. I'll have him out of my house before the day is done. Wait a bit, Mrs. Warren. Do nothing rash. I begin to think that this affair may be very much more important than appeared at first sight. It is clear now that some danger is threatening your lodger. It is equally clear that his enemies, lying in wait for him near your door, mistook your husband for him in the foggy morning light. On discovering their mistake, they released him. What they would have done had it not been a mistake, we can only conjecture." "Well, what am I to do, Mr. Holmes?" "I've a great fancy to see this lodger of yours, Mrs. Warren." "I don't see how that is to be managed unless you break in the door. I always hear him unlock it as I go down the stair after I leave the tray." "He has to take the tray in. Surely we can conceal ourselves and see him to do it." The landlady thought for a moment. "Well, sir, there's a box room opposite. I could arrange a looking-glass, perhaps, and if you were behind the door—" "Excellent," said Holmes. "When does he lunch?" "About 1, sir." "Then Watson and I will come round in time. For the present, Mrs. Warren, good-bye." At 12:30 we found ourselves upon the steps of Mrs. Warren's house, a high, thin, yellow brick edifice in Great Orme Street, a narrow thoroughfare at the northeast side of the British Museum. Standing as it does near the corner of the street, it commands a view down Howe Street, with its most pretentious houses. Holmes pointed with a chuckle to one of these, a row of residential flats, which projected so that they could not fail to catch the eye. "See, Watson," said he, "high red house with stone facing. This is the signal station, all right. We know the place, and we know the code, so surely our task should be simple. There's a 'To Let' card on that window. It is evidently an empty flat, to which the confederate has access. Well, Mrs. Warren, what now?" "I have it all ready for you. If you will both come up and leave your boots below on the landing, I shall put you there now." It was an excellent hiding place, which he had arranged. The mirror was so placed that, seated in the dark, we could very plainly see the door opposite. We had hardly settled down in it, and Mrs. Warren left us, when a distant tinkle announced that our mysterious neighbor had rung. Presently the landlady appeared with the tray, laid it down upon a chair beside the closed door, and then, treading heavily, departed. Crouching together in the angle of the door, we kept our eyes fixed upon the mirror. Suddenly, as the landlady's footsteps died away, there was a creak of a turning key. The handle revolved, and 2 thin hands darted out and lifted the tray from the chair. An instant later it was hurriedly replaced, and I caught a glimpse of a dark, beautiful, horrified face glaring at the narrow opening of the box room. When the door crashed to, the key turned once more, and all was silence. Holmes twitched my sleeve, and together we stole down the stair. "I will call again in the evening," said he to the expectant landlady. "I think, Watson, we can discuss this business better in our own quarters." "My surmise, as you saw, proved to be correct," he said, speaking from the depths of his easy-chair. "There has been a substitution of lodgers. What I did not foresee is that we should find a woman, and no ordinary woman, Watson." "She saw us." "Well, she saw something to alarm her, that is certain. The general sequence of events is pretty clear, is it not? A couple seek refuge in London from a very terrible and instant danger. The measure of that danger is the rigor of their precautions. The man, who has some work which he must do, desires to leave the woman in absolute safety while he does it. It is not an easy problem, but he solved it in an original fashion, and so effectively that her presence was not even known to the landlady, who supplies her with food. The printed messages, as is now evident, were to prevent her sex being discovered by the writing. The man cannot come near the woman, or he will guide their enemies to her. Since he cannot communicate with her direct, he has recourse to the agony column of a paper. So far, all is clear." "But what is the root of it?" "Ah, yes, Watson. Severely practical, as usual. What is at the root of it all? Mrs. Warren's whimsical problem enlarges somewhat and assumes a more sinister aspect as we proceed. This much we can say, that it is no ordinary love escapade. You saw the woman's face at the sign of danger. We have heard, too, of the attack upon the landlord, which was undoubtedly meant for the lodger. These alarms, and the desperate need for secrecy, argue that the matter is one of life or death. The attack upon Mr. Warren further shows that the enemy, whoever they are themselves not aware of the substitution of the female lodger for the male. It is very curious and complex, Watson. Why should you go further in? What have you to gain from it? What, indeed? It is art for art's sake, Watson. I suppose when you doctored you found yourself studying cases without thought of a fee? For my education, Holmes. Education never ends, Watson. It is a series of lessons with the greatest for the last. This is an instructive case. There is neither money nor credit in it, and yet one would wish to tidy it up. When dusk comes, we should find ourselves one stage advanced in our investigation. When we returned to Mrs. Warren's rooms, the gloom of a London winter evening had thickened into one grey curtain, a dead monotone of color, broken only by the sharp yellow squares of the windows and the blurred halos of the gas lamps. As we peered from the darkened sitting-room of the lodging-house, one more dim light glimmered high up through the obscurity. "Someone is moving in that room," said Holmes in a whisper, his gaunt and eager face thrust forward to the window-pane. "Yes, I can see his shadow. There he is again. He has a candle in his hand. Now he is peering across. He wants to be sure that she is on the lookout. Now he begins to flash. Take the message also, Watson, that we may check each other. A single flash, that is A, surely. Now then, how many did you make? 20. So did I. That should mean T. A-T, at. That's intelligible enough. Another T. Surely, this is the beginning of a second word. Now then. T-E-N-T-A. Dead stop. That can't be all. Watson. A-T-T-E-N-T-A. Gives no sense. Nor is it any better as three words. At, ten, ta. Unless T-A are a person's initials. There it goes again. What is it? A-T-T-E-Y. It is the same message over again. Curious, Watson. Very curious. Now he is off once again. A-T. Why, he is repeating it for a third time. A-T-T-E-N-T-A 3 times. How often will he repeat it? No, that seems to be the finish. He has withdrawn from the window. What do you make of it, Watson? A cipher message, Holmes. My companion gave a sudden chuckle of comprehension. And not a very obscure cipher, Watson, said he. Why, of course, it is Italian. Of course it's Italian. The A, that is addressed to a woman. Beware, beware, beware. How's that, Watson? I believe you have hit it. Not a doubt of it. It is a very urgent message, thrice repeated to make it more so. But beware of what? Wait a bit. He is coming to the window once more. Again we saw the dim silhouette of a crouching man and the whisk of a small flame across the window as the signals were renewed. They came more rapidly than before, so rapid that it was hard to follow them. P-E-R-I-C-O-L-O. Pericolo. What is that, Watson? Danger, isn't it? Yes, by Jove, it's a danger signal. There he goes again. P-E-R-I... Oh, what on earth? The light had suddenly gone out. The glimmering square of window had disappeared, and the third floor formed a dark band round the lofty building, with its tiers of shining casements. That last warning cry had been suddenly cut short. How? And by whom? The same thought occurred on the instant to both of us. Holmes sprang up from where he crouched in the window. "This is serious, Watson. There is some devilry, going forward. Why should such a message stop in such a way? I should put Scotland Yard in touch with this business, and yet it is so pressing for us to leave." "Shall I go for the police?" "We must define the situation a little more clearly. It may bear some more innocent interpretation. Come, Watson, let us go across ourselves and see what we can make of it." Part 2. As we walked rapidly down Howe Street, I glanced back at the building which he had left. There, dimly outlined at the top window, I could see the shadow of a woman's head, gazing tensely, rigidly out into the night, waiting with breathless suspense for the renewal of that interrupted message. At the doorway of the Howe Street flats, a man, muffled in a cravat and greatcoat, was leaning against the railing. He started as the hall light fell upon our faces. I had done a cardinal sin. I was too excited and just immediately went into part 2 without talking about part 1 at all. How will I live with myself? All right, so part 1. We have a Mrs. Warren who has rushed to Holmes and Watson. She has a new lodger who has paid through a fortnight, and she was very excited about it. Her and her husband are on rough times, so not really any questions. The lodger had a couple of rules that he wanted. 1, he wanted a key, and 2, do not disturb me. Never go upstairs, do not disturb me. Anything that I need, I will ring for. And so they were like, yeah, we can do that. We can handle this. And so the Warrens, Mr. and Mrs., have not seen this man since. He went out the first night, and they didn't see him leave. They just heard him leave, and they just have not seen him. And you can just hear pacing back and forth like all day. And the only time that there's any sort of communication is when the lodger rings the bell, which means that he's ready for lunch. And so Mrs. Warren brings up lunch, sets it on a chair, and then leaves, and then rings a bell again when lunch is done, when they're done with it. And so Watson and Holmes are like, there's somebody else there. This isn't the same person. Oh, and they leave messages in print. Things like Daily Gazette, Match, that sort of thing. And so they go there, they hide in a room across from the hall and just wait for lunchtime. And they are able to see a person, and it's a female, not the male lodger. So they're like, suspicious. And the woman who is taking out lunch gets scared and like shuts the door immediately and like looks terrified. And so a couple days pass, and Mrs. Warren rushes back to Sherlock and Holmes because Sherlock and Holmes. What am I saying? I keep saying them like they're separate people. They're not. Holmes and Watson. Holmes and Watson, because her husband had been attacked. He leaves early in the morning. A bag was thrown over his head. He was thrown into a cab and drove an hour away and just dumped. And Sherlock and Watson were like, okay, well, they clearly thought that this was the lodger. Let's look into this. They've also found out that messages are getting to the lodger by way of like complaint columns in the Daily Gazette, which is interesting. And they are now, well, one of the messages like indicated a location for the lodger to be aware of, and was like, you know the code, A is 1, B is 2, so on, blah, blah, blah. And so across the, in the building, they get like flashes of light, and they're in Italian, and it's just danger. And it's repeated 3 times, and then there's like a break, and then for a second time, but a different word for danger. And in the midst of repeating it the second time, it was interrupted, and there's just no light, nothing. It's just abruptly stopped. And that's where we are now. Watson and Holmes are now going to go over to the building to see what they can find in that window. We'll see. We'll see. Now that we've done the recap, let's get back to part 2. Okay, let's see. They are going over to the flats. Yes. Wait, who are they running into? Oh, okay. Here we go. Holmes, he cried. Why, Gregson, said my companion as he shook hands with the Scotland Yard detective. Journeys end with lovers meeting. What brings you here? The same reason that brings you, I expect, said Gregson. How you got onto it, I can't imagine. Different threads, but leading to the same tangle. I've been taking the signals. Signals. Yes, from the window. They broke off in the middle. We came over to see the reason. But since it is safe in your hands, I see no object in continuing the business. Wait a bit, said Gregson eagerly. Oh, I'll do you this justice, Mr. Holmes, that I never in a case that I was never in a case yet that I didn't feel stronger for having you at my side. There's only the one exit to these flats, so we have him safe. Who is he? Well, we score over you for once, Mr. Holmes. You must give us the best this time. He struck his stick sharply upon the ground, on which a cabman, his whip in his hand, sauntered over from a four-wheeler which stood on the far side of the street. May I introduce you to Mr. Sherlock Holmes, he said to the cabman. This is Mr. Leverton, of Pinkerton's American Agency. The hero of the Long Island cave mystery, said Holmes. Sir, I am pleased to meet you. The American, a quiet, businesslike young man with a clean-shaven hatchet face, flushed up at the words of commendation. I am on the trail of my new life, Mr. Holmes, said he. If I can get Gorgiano... What? Gorgiano of the Red Circle? Oh, he has a European fame, has he? Well, we've learned all about him in America. We know he is at the bottom of 50 murders, and yet we have nothing positive we can take him on. I tracked him all over New York, and I've been close to him for a week in London, waiting some excuse to get my hands on his collar. Mr. Gregson and I ran him to ground in that big tenement house, and there's only the one door, so he can't slip us. There's 3 folk come out since he went in, but I'll swear he wasn't one of them. Mr. Holmes talks of signals, said Gregson. I expect, as usual, he knows a good deal that we don't. In a few clear words, Holmes explained the situation as it had appeared to us. The American struck his hands together with vexation. He's on to us, he cried. I guess I should be doing an American accent. I'm not going to change. Why do you think so? Well, it figures out this way, does it not? Here he is, sending out messages to an accomplice. There are several of his gangs in London. Then suddenly, just as by your own account, he was telling them that there was danger, he broke short off. What could it mean except that from the window he had suddenly either caught sight of us in the street, or in some way come to understand how close the danger was, and that he must act right away if he was to avoid it? What do you suggest, Mr. Holmes? That we all go up at once and see for ourselves. But we have no warrant for his arrest. He is in unoccupied premises, under suspicious circumstances, said Gregson. That is good enough for the moment. When we have him by the heels, we can see if New York can't help us keep him. I'll take the responsibility of arresting him now. Our official detectives may blunder in the matter of intelligence, but never in that of courage. Miss Gregson climbed the stair to arrest this desperate murderer with the same absolutely quiet and businesslike bearing with which he would have ascended the official staircase of Scotland Yard. The Pinkerton man had tried to push past him, but Gregson had firmly elbowed him back. London dangers were the privilege of London force. The door of the left-hand flat upon the third landing was standing ajar. Gregson pushed it open. Within all was absolute silence and darkness. I struck a match and lit the detective's lantern. As I did so, and as the flicker steadied into a flame, we all gave a gasp of surprise. On the deal boards of the carpetless floor, there was outlined a fresh track of blood. The red steps pointed towards us and led away from an inner room, the door of which was closed. Gregson flung it open and held his light full ablaze in front of him, while we all peered eagerly over his shoulders. In the middle of the floor of the empty room was huddled the figure of an enormous man, his clean-shaven, swarthy face grotesquely horrible in its contortion, and his head encircled by a ghastly crimson halo of blood, lying in a broad wet circle upon the white woodwork. His knees were drawn up, his hands thrown out in agony, and from the center of his broad, brown, upturned throat there projected the white haft of a knife driven blade deep into his body. Giant as he was, the man must have gone down like a pole-axed ox before that terrific blow. Beside his right hand a most formidable horn-handled, two-edged dagger lay upon the floor, and near it a black kid glove. By George, it's Black Gorgiano himself, cried the American detective. Someone has got ahead of us this time. Here is the candle in the window, Mr. Holmes, said Gregson. Why, whatever are you doing? Holmes had stepped across and lit the candle, and was passing it backward and forward across the window panes. Then he peered into the darkness, blew the candle out, and threw it on the floor. I rather think that will be helpful, said he. He came over and stood in deep thought while the two professionals were examining the body. You say that 3 people came out from the flat while you were waiting downstairs? Said he at last. Did you observe them closely? Yes, I did. Was there a fellow about 30, black-bearded, dark, of middle size? Yes. He was the last to pass me. That is your man, I fancy. I can give you his description, and we have a very excellent outline of his footmark. That should be enough for now. That should be enough for you. Not much, Mr. Holmes, among the millions of London. Perhaps not. That is why I thought it best to summon this lady to your aid. We all turned round at the words. There, framed in the doorway, was a tall and beautiful woman, the mysterious lodger of Bloomsbury. Slowly she advanced, her face pale and drawn with a frightful apprehension, her eyes fixed and staring, her terrified gaze riveted upon the dark figure on the door. "You have killed him," she muttered. "Oh, Dio mio, you have killed him." Then I heard a sudden sharp intake of her breath, and she sprang into the air with a cry of joy. Round and round she danced. Round and round the room she danced, her hands clapping, her dark eyes gleaming with delighted wonder, and 1,000 pretty Italian exclamations pouring from her lips. It was terrible and amazing to see such a woman so convulsed with joy at such a sight. Suddenly she stopped and gazed at us all with a questioning stare. "But you are police, are you not? You have killed Giuseppe Gorgiano? Is that so?" We are police, madam. She looked round into the shadow of the room. But then, where is Gennaro? She asked. He is my husband, Gennaro Luca. I am Emilia Luca, and we are both from New York. Where is Gennaro? He called me this moment from this window, and I ran with all my speed. It was I who called you, said Sherlock. You? How could you call? Your cipher was not difficult, madam. Your presence here was desirable. I knew that I had only to flash Vieni, and you would surely come. The beautiful Italian looked with awe at my companion. I do not understand how you know these things, she said. Giuseppe Gorgiano, how did he— She paused, and then suddenly her face lit up with pride and delight. Now I see it. My Gennaro, my splendid, beautiful Gennaro, who has guarded me safe from all harm. He did it, with his own strong hand. He killed the monster. Oh, Gennaro, how wonderful you are! What woman could ever be worthy of such a man? Well, Mrs. Luca, said the prosaic Gregson, laying his hand upon the lady's sleeve with as little sentiment as if she were a Notting Hill hooligan, I am not very clear yet who you are, or what you are, but you've said enough to make it very clear that we shall want you at the Yard. One moment, Gregson, said Holmes. I rather fancy that this lady may be as anxious to give us information as we can be to get it. You understand, madam, that your husband will be arrested and tried for the death of the man who lies before us. What you say may be used in evidence, but if you think that he has acted from motives which are not criminal, and which he should wish to have known, then you cannot serve him better than by telling us the whole story. Now that Gorgiano is dead, we fear nothing, said the lady. He was a devil and a monster, and there can be no judge in the world who would punish my husband for killing him. In that case, said Holmes, my suggestion is that we lock this door, leave things as we found them, go with this lady to her room, and form our opinion after we have heard what it is that she has to say to us. Half an hour later we were seated, all four, in the small sitting-room of Signora Luca, listening to her remarkable narrative of those sinister events, the ending of which we had chanced to witness. She spoke in rapid and fluent, but very unconventional English, which, for the sake of clearness, I will make grammatical. Thank you, Watson, because I already have a hard time with reading grammatical English. If we just threw in things and structures that don't make sense, I may have cried. Thank you, Watson. I appreciate it. I was born in Posillipo, near Naples, said she, and was the daughter of Augusto Barelli, who was the chief lawyer and once the deputy of that part. Gennaro was in my father's employment, and I came to love him, as any woman must. He had neither money nor position, nothing but his beauty and strength and energy. So my father forbade the match. We fled together, were married at Bari, and sold my jewelry to gain the money which would take us to America. This was 4 years ago, and we have been in New York ever since. Watson is the real hero, absolutely, and words are hard. Words are hard, man. I've said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. And more. Fortune was very good to us at first. Gennaro was able to do a service to an Italian gentleman. He saved him from some ruffians in the place called the Bowery, and so made a powerful friend. His name was Tito Castellote, and he was the senior partner of the great firm of Castellote and Zamba, who are the chief fruit importers of New York. What a title! Signor Zamba is an invalid, and our new friend Castellote has all power within the firm, which employs more than 300 men. He took my husband into his employment, made him head of a department, and showed him his good will towards him in every way. Signor Castellote was a bachelor, and I believe that he felt as if Gennaro was his son, and both my husband and I loved him as if he were our father. We had taken and furnished a little house in Brooklyn, and our whole future seemed assured, when that black cloud appeared, which was soon to overspread our sky. One night, when Gennaro returned from his work, he brought a fellow countryman back with him. His name was Gosciano, and he had come also from Posillipo. He was a huge man, as you can testify, for you have looked upon his corpse. Not only was his body that of a giant, but everything about him was grotesque, gigantic, and terrifying. His voice was like thunder in our little house. There was scarce room for the whirl of his great arms as he talked. His thoughts, his emotions, his passions, all were exaggerated and monstrous. He talked, or rather roared, with such energy that others could not but sit and listen, cowed with the mighty stream of words. His eyes blazed at you and held you at his mercy. He was a terrible and wonderful man. I thank God that he is dead. He came again and again, yet I was aware that Gennaro was no more happy than I was in his presence. My poor husband would sit pale and listless, listening to the endless raving upon politics and upon social questions which made up our visitor's conversation. Gennaro said nothing, but I, who knew him so well, could read in his face some emotion which I had never seen there before. At first I thought it was dislike, and then gradually I understood that it was more than dislike. It was fear. A deep, secret, shrinking fear. That night, the night that I read his terror, I put my arms round him and I implored him by his love for me, and by all that he held dear, to hold nothing from me, and to tell me why this huge man overshadowed him so. He told me, and my own heart grew cold as ice as I listened. My poor Gennaro, in his wild and fiery days, when all the world seemed against him and his mind was driven half mad by the injustices of life, had joined a Neapolitan society, the Red Circle, which was allied with the cold Carbonari. The oaths and secrets of this brotherhood were frightful, but once within its rule no escape was possible. When he had fled to America, Gennaro thought that he had cast it all off forever. What was his horror one evening to meet in the street the very man who had initiated him in Naples, the giant Gosciano, a man who had earned the name of Death in the south of Italy, for he was red to the elbow in murder. He had come to New York to avoid the Italian police, and he had already planted a branch of this dreadful society in his new home. All this Gennaro told me, and showed me a summons which he had received that very day, a red circle drawn upon the head of it, telling him that a lodge would be held upon a certain date, and that his presence, as it was required and ordered. That was bad enough, but worse was to come. I had noticed for some time that when Giorgiano came to us, as he constantly did in the evening, he spoke much to me, and even when his words were to my husband, those terrible, glaring, wild beast eyes of his were always turned to me. One night his secret came out. I had awakened what he called love within him, the love of a brute, a savage. Gennaro had not yet returned when he came. He pushed his way in, seized me in his mighty arms, hugged me in his bare embrace, covered me with kisses, and implored me to come away with him. I was struggling and screaming when Gennaro entered and attacked him. He struck Gennaro senseless and fled from the house, which he was never more to enter. It was a deadly enemy that we made that night. A few days later came the meeting. Gennaro returned from it with a face which told me that something dreadful had occurred. It was worse than he could have imagined possible. The funds of the society were raised by blackmailing rich Italians and threatening them with violence should they refuse the money. It seemed that Castellote, our dear friend and benefactor, had been approached. He had refused to yield to threats, and he had handed the notices to the police. It was resolved, now, that such an example should be made of him as would prevent any other victim from rebelling. At the meeting, it was arranged that he and his house should be blown up with dynamite. There was a drawing of lots as to who should carry out the deed. Gennaro saw our enemy's cruel face smiling at him as he dipped his hand in the bag. No doubt it had been prearranged in some fashion, for it was the fatal disc with the red circle upon it, the mandate for murder, which he lay upon his palm. He was to kill his best friend, or he was to expose himself and me to the vengeance of his comrades. It was part of their fiendish system to punish those whom they feared and hated by injuring not only their own persons, but those whom they loved, and it was the knowledge of this which hung as a terror over my poor Gennaro's head and drove him nearly crazy with apprehension. All that night we sat together, our arms around each other, each strengthening each for the troubles that lay before us. The very next evening had been fixed for the attempt. By midday my husband and I were on our way to London, but not before he had given our benefactor full warning of his danger, and had also left such information for the police as would safeguard his life for the future. The rest, gentlemen, you know for yourselves. We were sure that our enemies would be behind us like our own shadows. Giorgiano had his private reasons for vengeance, but in any case we knew how ruthless, cunning, and untiring he could be. Both Italy and America are full of stories of his dreadful powers. If ever they were exerted, it would be now. My darling made use of the few clear days which our start had given us in arranging for a refuge for me in such a fashion that no possible danger could reach me. For his own part, he wished to be free that he might communicate both with the American and the Italian police. I do not myself know where he lived or how. All that I learned was that through the columns of the newspaper. But once, as I looked through my window, I saw two Italians watching the house, and I understood in some way Giorgiano had found our retreat. Finally, Gennaro told me through the paper that he would signal to me from a certain window, but when the signal came, they were nothing but warnings, which were suddenly interrupted. It was very clear to me now that he knew Giorgiano to be close upon him, and that, thank God, he was ready for him when he came. And now, gentlemen, I would ask you whether we have anything to fear from the law, or whether any judge upon earth would condemn my Gennaro for what he has done. Well, Mr. Gregson, said the American, looking across at the official, I don't know what your British point of view may be, but I guess that in New York this lady's husband will receive a pretty general vote of thanks. She will have to come with me and see the chief, Gregson answered. If what she says is corroborated, I do not think she or her husband has much to fear. But what I can't make head or tail of, Mr. Holmes, is how on earth you got yourself mixed up in this matter. Education, Gregson. Education. Still seeking knowledge at the old university. Well, Watson, you have one more specimen of the tragic and grotesque to add to your collection. By the way, it is not 8 o'clock, and a Wagner night at Covent Gardens. If we hurry, we might be in time for the second act. End of The Adventure of the Red Circle. Short and sweet. I liked it. I did like it. Something that I am finding, at least in these shorter Sherlock stories, is that instead of, well, I guess we also got that when we were reading Valley of Fear, is that there is always this monologue of like, and I will tell you what has actually happened. It's like once they Scooby-Doo you, like they take off the mask and it's like, those meddling kids or whatever. Then we get to like, I would have gotten away with it too, and this is all the things that would happen, whether it's told from like the perpetrator or from the victim. I just think it's is an interesting way because you don't really see that now in mystery books, at least not the mystery books that like I've been reading. It's all very show don't tell, whereas this feels very tell. Sometimes you get some show. Exactly. Zoinks. It's all very zoinks. Just interesting to see how writing has changed. The styles of writing has changed or was influenced by. Okay. What is next, pray tell? 'Tis the adventure of Bruce Partington plans. No, haven't heard of it, which is fun. I didn't realize how little I knew about any of the original Sherlock Holmes source material. And let me tell you, I knew none. Like I knew who the characters are, of course, or were, or whatever tense I felt like saying at that time. Um, like, but they were all from like adaptations. Like, yeah, from the shows, but like from also like Sherlock Holmes stories written by other authors. Um, which is fun and cool. So getting the like the source is nice. And now I feel like I'm gonna find way more references, which is what happened when we read Don Quixote. Ever since then, there have been several books that I have read, or several different like media that I've intaken that has referenced Don Quixote by name. So it's like, haha, I've read that book. I know what they're talking about. I understand the connection, and I feel like I'm part of this cute little club. This little nerdy club. And I just feel included and I like it. It's fun. But I don't have to tell you. You know this already. Okay. Just kidding. One more sip. I know I'm like baiting you. Now we'll do it. I know. So many sips. The Adventure of Bruce Partington Plans. In the third week of November. See, I also kind of wish that I like planned this and knew when things were, and it could have been the third week of November. It's fine. In the third week of November, in the year 1895, a dense yellow fog settled down upon London. From the Monday to the Thursday, I doubt whether it was ever possible from our windows in Baker Street to see the loom of the opposite houses. The first day Holmes had spent in cross-indexing his huge book of references. The second and third had been patiently occupied upon a subject which he had recently made his hobby, the music of the Middle Ages. But when, for the fourth time, after pushing back our chairs from breakfast, we saw the greasy, heavy brown swirl still drifting past us and condensing in oily drops upon the window panes, my comrade's impatient and active nature could endure this drab existence no longer. He paced restlessly about our sitting room in a fever of suppressed energy, biting his nails, tapping the furniture, and chafing against inaction. He's got the zoomies. Nothing of interest in the paper, Watson, said he. I was aware that by anything of interest, Holmes meant anything of criminal interest. There was the news of a revolution, of a possible war, and of an impending change of government, but these did not come within the horizon of my companion. I could see nothing recorded in the shape of crime which was not commonplace and futile. Holmes groaned, and resumed his restless meanderings. The London criminal is certainly a dull fellow, said he, in the querulous voice of the sportsman whose game has failed him. Look out this window, Watson. See how the figures loom up, are dimly seen, and then blend once more into the cloud bank. The thief or the murderer could roam London on such a day as the tiger does the jungle, unseen until he pounces, and then evident only to his victim. There have, said I, been numerous petty thefts. Holmes snorted his contempt. This great and somber stage is set for something more worthy than that, said he. It is fortunate for this community that I am not a criminal. It is, indeed, said I heartily. Suppose that I were Brooks, or Woodhouse, or any of the 50 men who have good reason for taking my life, how long could I survive against my own pursuit? A summons, a bogus appointment, and all would be over. It is well they don't have days of fog in the Latin countries, the countries of assassination. By Jove, here comes something at last to break our dead monotony. It was the maid, with a telegram. Holmes tore it open and burst out laughing. Well, well, what next? Said he. Brother Mycroft is coming round. Why not? I asked. Why not? It is as if you met a tram-car coming down the country lane. Mycroft has his rails, and he runs on them. His Pall Mall lodgings, the Diogenesis Club, Whitehall, that is his cycle. Once, and only once, he has been here. What upheaval can possibly have derailed him? Does he not explain? Holmes handed me his brother's telegram. Must see you over Cadogan West. Coming at once. Mycroft. Cadogan West? I have heard the name. It recalls nothing to my mind, but that Mycroft should break out in this erratic fashion. A planet might as well leave its orbit. By the way, do you know what Mycroft is? I had some vague recollection of an explanation at the time of the adventure of the Greek interpreter. You told me that he had been some small office under the British government. Holmes chuckled. I did not know you quite so well in those days. One has to be discreet when one talks of high matters of state. You are right in thinking that he is under the British government. You would also be right in a sense if you said that occasionally he is the British government. My dear Holmes, I thought I might surprise you. Mycroft draws £450 a year, retains a subordinate, has no ambitions of any kind, will receive neither honor nor title, but remains the most indispensable man in the country. But how? Well, his position is unique. He has made it for himself. There has never been anything like it before, nor will be again. He has the tidiest and most orderly brain, with the greatest capacity for storing facts, of any man living. The same great powers which I have turned to the detection of crime he has used for this particular business. The conclusions of every department are passed to him, and he is the central exchange, the clearing-house, which makes out the balance. All other men are specialists, but his specialism is omniscience. All other men, we will suppose that a minister needs information as to a point which involves the Navy, India, Canada, and the bimetallic question. He could get his separate advices from various departments upon each, but only Mycroft can focus them all, and say offhand how each factor would affect the other. They began by using him as a shortcut, a convenience. Now he has made himself an essential. In that great brain of his everything is pigeonholed and decided. The national policy. Nope, pigeonholed and can be handed out in an instant. I'm just skipping lines all over here. Again and again his word has decided the national policy. He lives in it. He thinks of nothing else save when, as an intellectual exercise, he unbends if I call upon him, and asks him to advise me on one of our little problems. But Jupiter is descending today. What on earth can it mean? Who is Cadogan West, and what is he to Mycroft? I have it, I cried, and plunged among the litter of papers upon the sofa. Yes, here it is. Sure enough, Cadogan West was the young man who was found dead on the Underground on Tuesday morning. Holmes sat up at attention, his pipe halfway to his lips. "This must be serious, Watson. A death which has caused my brother to alter his habits can be no ordinary one. What in the world can he have to do with it? The case was featureless, as I remember it. The young man had apparently fallen out of the train and killed himself. He had not been robbed, and there was no particular reason to suspect violence. Is that not so?" "There has been an inquest," said I, "and a good many fresh facts have come out. Look at more closely. I should certainly say that it was a curious case." "Judging by its effects upon my brother, I should think it must be a most extraordinary one." He snuggled down in his armchair. "Now, Watson, let us have the facts." The man's name was Arthur Cadogan West. He was 27 years of age, unmarried, and a clerk at Woolwich Arsenal. Government employ. Behold the link with Brother Mycroft. He left Woolwich suddenly on Monday night. Was last seen by his fiancée, Miss Violet Westbury, whom he left abruptly in the fog about 7:30 that evening. There was no quarrel between them, and she can give no motive for his action. The next thing heard of him was when his dead body was discovered by a plate layer named Mason, just outside Aldgate Station on the Underground system in London. When? The body was found at 6 on the Tuesday morning. It was lying wide of the metal upon the left hand of the track as one goes eastward, at a point close to the station, where the line emerges from the tunnel in which it runs. The head was badly crushed, an injury which might well have been caused by a fall from the train. The body could only have come up on the line that way. Had it been carried down from any neighboring streets, it would have passed the station barriers, where a collector is always standing. The point seems absolutely certain. Very good. The case is definite enough. The man, dead or alive, either fell or was precipitated from the train. So much is clear to me. Continue. The trains which traverse the lines of rail beside which the body was found are those which run from west to east, some being purely metropolitan, and some from Willesden and outlying junctions. It can be stated for certain that this young man, when he met his death, was traveling in this direction at some late hour of the night, but at what point he entered the train it is impossible to state. His ticket, of course, would show that. There was no ticket in his pockets. No ticket? Dear me, Watson, this is really very singular. According to my experience, it is not possible to reach the platform of a metropolitan train without exhibiting one's ticket. Presumably, then, the young man had one. Was it taken from him in order to conceal the station from which he came? It is possible. Or did he drop it in the carriage? That also is possible. But the point is of curious interest. I understand that there was no sign of robbery. Apparently not. There's a list here of his possessions. His purse contained £2.15. He had also a checkbook on the Woolwich branch of the Capital and Counties Bank. Through this his identity was established. There was also 2 dress circle tickets for the Woolwich Theatre, dated for that very evening. Also a small packet of technical papers. Holmes gave an exclamation of satisfaction. There we have it at last, Watson. British Government. Woolwich. Arsenal. Technical papers. Brother Mycroft. The chain is complete. But here he comes, if I am not mistaken, to speak for himself. A moment later, the tall and portly form of Mycroft Holmes was ushered into the room. Heavily built and massive, there was a suggestion of uncouth physical inertia in the figure, but above this unwieldy frame there was perched a head so masterful in its brow, so alert in its steel-gray, deep-set eyes, so firm in its lips, and so subtle in its play of expression, that after the first glance one forgot the gross body and remembered only the dominant mind. At his heels came our friend Lestrade of Scotland Yard, thin and austere. The gravity of both their faces foretold some weighty quest. The detective shook hands without a word. Mycroft Holmes struggled out of his overcoat and subsided into an armchair. "A most annoying business, Sherlock," said he. "I extremely dislike altering my habits, but the powers that be would take no denial. In the present state of Siam, it is most awkward that I should be away from the office, but it is a real crisis. I have never seen the Prime Minister so upset. As to the Admiralty, it is buzzing with an overturned beehive." "Have you read up on the case?" "We have just done so. What were the technical papers?" There's the point. Fortunately, it has not come out. The press would be furious if it did. The papers, which this wretched youth had in his pocket, were the plans to the Bruce Partington submarines." Mycroft Holmes spoke with a solemnity which showed his sense of the importance of the subject. His brother and I sat expectant. "Surely you have heard of it?" "Thought everyone had heard of it." "Only as a name?" "Its importance can hardly be exaggerated. It has been most jealously guarded of all government secrets. You may take it from me that naval warfare becomes impossible within the radius of a Bruce Partington's operation. 2 years ago, a very large sum was smuggled through the estimates and was expended in acquiring a monopoly of the invasion. Every effort has been made to keep the secret. The plans, which are exceedingly intricate, comprising some 30 separate patents, each essential in the working of the whole, are kept in an elaborate safe in a confidential office adjoining the arsenal, with burglar-proof doors and windows. Under no conceivable circumstance were the plans to be taken from the office. If the chief constructor of the Navy desired to consult them, even he was forced to go to the Woolwich office for the purpose. And yet, here we find them in the pocket of a dead junior clerk in the heart of London. From an official point of view, it's simply awful." "But you have recovered them?" "No, Sherlock, no. That's the pinch. We have not. 10 papers are taken from Woolwich. There were 7 in the pocket of Cadogan West. The 3 most essential are gone, stolen, vanished. You must drop everything, Sherlock. Never mind your usual petty puzzles of the police court. It's a vital international problem that you have to solve. Why did Cadogan West take the papers? Where are the missing ones? How did he die? How came his body where it was found? How can the evil be set right? Find an answer to all these questions, and you will have done good service for your country." "Why do you not solve it yourself, Mycroft? You can see as far as I." "Possibly, Sherlock, but it is a question of getting details. Give me your details, and from an armchair I will return you in excellent expert opinion. But to run here and run there, to cross-question railway guards, and lie on my face with a lens to my eye, it is not my métier. No, you are the man who can clear the matter up. If you have a fancy to see your name in the next honors list—" My friend smiled and shook his head. "I play the game for the game's own sake," said he. "But the problem certainly presents some points of interest, and I shall be very pleased to look into it. Some more facts, please." I have jotted down the more essential ones upon this sheet of paper, together with a few addresses which you will find of service. The actual official guardian of the papers is the famous government expert Sir James Walter, whose decorations and subtitles fill 2 lines of a book of reference. He has brown-gray in the service, is a gentleman, a favored guest in the most exalted houses, and, above all, a man whose patriotism is beyond suspicion. He is one of 2 who have a key of the safe. I may add that the papers were undoubtedly in the office during working hours on Monday, and that Sir James left for London about 3 o'clock, taking his key with him. He was at the house of Admiral Sinclair at Berkeley Square during the whole of the evening when this incident occurred. "Has that fact been verified?" Yes, his brother Colonel Valentine Walter has testified to his departure from Woolwich, and Admiral Sinclair to his arrival in London. So, Sir James is no longer a direct factor in the problem. Who was the other man with a key? The senior clerk and draftsman, Mr. Sidney Johnson. He is a man of 40, married with 5 children. He is a silent, morose man, but he has, on the whole, an excellent record in the public service. He is unpopular with his colleagues, but a good worker. According to his own account, corroborated only by the word of his wife, he was at home the whole of Monday evening after office hours, and his key has never left the watch chain upon which it hangs. Tell us about Cadogan West. He has been 10 years in the service and has done good work. He has the reputation of being hot-headed and impetuous, but a straight, honest man. We have nothing against him. He was next to Sidney Johnson in the office. His duties brought him into daily, personal contact with the plans. No one else had the handling of them. Who locked the plans up at night? Mr. Sidney Johnson, the senior clerk. Well, it is surely perfectly clear who took them away. They are actually found upon the person of this junior clerk, Cadogan West. That seems final, does it not? It does, Sherlock, and yet it leaves so much unexplained. In the first place, why did he take them? I presume they were of value. He could have got several thousands for them very easily. Can you suggest any possible motive for taking the papers to London except to sell them? No, I cannot. Then, we must take that as our working hypothesis. Young West took the papers. Now, this could only be done by having a false key. Several false keys. He had to open the building and the room. He had, then, several false keys. He took the papers to London to sell the secret, intending, no doubt, to have the plans themselves back in the safe next morning before they were missed. While in London on this treasonable mission, he met his end. How? We will suppose that he was travelling back to Woolwich when he was killed and thrown out of the compartment. Aldgate, where the body was found, is considerably past the station for London Bridge, which would be his route to Woolwich. Many circumstances could be imagined under which he would pass London Bridge. There was someone in the carriage, for example, with whom he was having an absorbing interview. This interview led to a violent scene in which he lost his life. Possibly he tried to leave the carriage, fell out on the line, and so met his end. The other closed the door. There was a thick fog, and nothing could be seen. No, better explanation can be given for our present knowledge, and yet, Sherlock, how much you leave untouched. We will suppose, for argument's sake, that young Cadogan West had determined to convey these papers to London. He would naturally have made an appointment with the foreign agent, and kept his evening clear. Instead of that, he took 2 tickets for the theatre, escorted his fiancée halfway there, and then suddenly disappeared. A blind, said Lestrade, who had sat listening with some impatience to the conversation. A very singular one. That is objection number 1. Objection number 2. We will suppose that he reaches London and sees the foreign agent. He must bring back the papers before morning, or the loss will be discovered. He took away 10. Only 7 were in his pocket. What had become of the other 3? He certainly would not have left them of his own free will. Then again, where is the price of that treason? One would have expected to find a large sum of money in his pocket. It seems to me perfectly clear, said Lestrade. I have no doubt at all as to what occurred. He took the papers to sell them. He saw the agent. They could not agree as to price. He started home again, but the agent went with him. In the train, the agent murdered him, took the most essential papers, and threw his body from the carriage. That would account for everything, would it not? Why had he no ticket? The ticket would have shown which station was nearest the agent's house. Therefore, he took it from the murdered man's pocket. "Very good, Lestrade, very good," said Holmes. "Your theory holds together. But if this is true, then the case is at an end. On the one hand, the traitor is dead. On the other, the plans of the Bruce Partington submarine are presumably already on the continent. What is there for us to do?" "To act, Sherlock, to act!" cried Mycroft, swinging to his feet. "All my instincts are against this explanation. Use your powers. Go to the scene of the crime. See the people concerned. Leave no stone unturned. In all your career you have never had so great a chance of serving your country." "Well, well," said Holmes, shrugging his shoulders. "Come, Watson. You, and you, Lestrade, could you favor us with your company for an hour or two? We will begin our investigation by a visit to Aldgate Station. Goodbye, Mycroft. I shall let you have a report before evening, but I warn you in advance that you have little to expect." An hour later, Holmes, Lestrade, and I stood upon the Underground Railroad at the point where it emerges from the tunnel, immediately before Aldgate Station. A courteous, red-faced old gentleman represented the railway company. "This is where the young man's body lay," said he, indicating a spot about 3 feet from the metals. "It could not have fallen from above, for these, as you see, are all blank walls. Therefore, it could only have come from a train, and that train, so far as we can trace it, must have passed about midnight on Monday." "Have the carriages been examined for any sign of violence?" "There are no such signs, and no ticket has been found." "No record of a door being found open?" "None." "We have had some fresh evidence this morning," said Lestrade. "A passenger who passed Aldgate in the ordinary metropolitan train about 11:40 on Monday night declares that he had heard a heavy thud, as of a body striking the line, just before the train reached the station. There was dense fog, however, and nothing could be seen. He made no report of it at the time. Why? Whatever is the matter with Mr. Holmes?" My friend was standing with an expression of strained intensity upon his face, staring at the railway metals where they curved out of the tunnel. Aldgate is a junction, and there was a network of points. On these his eager, questioning eyes were fixed, and I saw on his keen, alert face that tightening of the lips, that quiver of the nostrils, and concentration of the heavy, tufted brows, which I knew so well. "Points," he muttered. "The points." "What of it? What do you mean?" "I suppose there are no great number of points on a system such as this?" "No, there are very few." "And a curve, too. Points and a curve. By Jove, if it were only so." "What is it, Mr. Holmes? Have you got a clue?" "An idea, an indication, no more. But the case certainly grows in interest. Unique, perfectly unique. And yet, why not? I do not see any indications of bleeding on the line." "There were hardly any." "But I understand that there was a considerable wound." "The bone was crushed, but there was no great external injury." "And yet one would have expected some bleeding. Would it be possible for me to inspect the train which contained the passenger who heard the thud of a fall in the fog?" "I fear not, Mr. Holmes. The train had been broken up before now, and the carriages redistributed." "I can assure you, Mr. Holmes," said Lestrade, "that every carriage had been carefully examined. I saw to it myself." The longer we go on, the more like American Southern Lestrade is starting to sound. It was one of my friend's most obvious weaknesses that he was impatient with less alert intelligences than his own. "Very likely," said he, turning away. "As it happens, it was not the carriage which I desired to examine. Watson, we have done all we can here. We need not trouble you any further, Mr. Lestrade. I think our investigations must now carry us to Woolwich." At London Bridge, Holmes wrote a telegram to his brother, which he handed to me before dispatching it. It ran thus: "See some light in the darkness, but it may possibly flicker out. Meanwhile, please send by messenger, to await return at Baker Street, a complete list of all foreign spies or international agents known to be in England, with full address. Sherlock." "That should be helpful, Watson," he remarked as we took our seats in the Woolwich train. "We certainly owe Brother Mycroft a debt for having introduced us to what promises to be a really very remarkable case." His eager face still wore that expression of intense and high-strung energy, which showed me that some novel and suggestive circumstances had opened up a stimulating line of thought. See the foxhound with hanging ears and drooping tail as it lolls about the kennel, and compare it with the same hound as, with gleaming eyes and straining muscles, it runs upon a breast-high scent. Such was the change in Holmes since the morning. He was a different man from the limp and lounging figure in the mouse-colored dressing-gown who had prowled so restlessly only a few hours before round the Foggart room. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle believed that fairies were real and wrote a book to prove it. It proved nothing, and I love that for him. I also love that for him. Love it. You do you, man. "There is material here. There is scope," said he. "I am dull indeed not to have understood its possibilities. Even now they are dark to me. The end is dark to me also, but I have hold of one idea which may lead us far. The man met his death elsewhere, and his body was on the roof of a carriage." "On the roof? Remarkable, is it not? But consider the facts. Is it a coincidence that it is found at the very point where the train pitches and sways as it comes round on the points? Is not that the place where an object falls on the roof, where an object upon the roof might be expected to fall off? The points would affect no object inside the train. Either the body fell from the roof, or a very curious coincidence has occurred. But now consider the question of the blood. Of course, there was no bleeding on the line if the body had bled elsewhere. Each fact is suggestive in itself. Together, they have a cumulative force." I was also thinking that he wasn't killed there. Let me just say that Holmes and I, so smart. Just because of, like, the blood and stuff. That's what I was thinking. Cumulative force, here we go. "And the ticket, too," I cried. "Exactly. We could not explain the absence of a ticket. This would explain it. Everything fits together. But suppose it were so. We are still as far as ever from unraveling the mystery of his death. Indeed, it becomes not simpler, but stranger." "Perhaps," said Holmes thoughtfully. "Perhaps." He relapsed into a silent reverie which lasted until the slow train drew up at last at Woolwich station. There he called a cab and drew Mycroft's paper from his pocket. "We have quite a little round of afternoon calls to make," said he. "I think that Sir James Walter claims our first attention." The house of the famous official was a fine villa with green lawns stretching down to the Thames. As he reached it, the fog was lifting, and a thin, watery sunshine was breaking through. A butler answered our ring. Sir James, sir," said he with solemn face. "Sir James died this morning." "Good heavens!" cried Holmes in amazement. "How did he die?" Perhaps you care to step in, sir, and see his brother, Colonel Valentine? Yes, we had best do so. We were ushered into a dim-lit drawing-room, where an instant later we were joined by a very tall, handsome, light-bearded man of 50, the younger brother of the dead scientist. His eyes, wild, stained cheeks, and unkempt hair all spoke of the sudden blow which had fallen upon the household. He was hardly articulate as he spoke of it. "It was a horrible scandal," said he. "My brother, Sir James, was a man of very sensitive honor, and he could not survive such an affair. It broke at his heart. He was always so proud of the efficiency of his department, and this was a crushing blow." We had hoped that he might have given us some indication which would have helped us to clear the matter up. I assure you that it was all a mystery to him, as it is to you and to all of us. He had already put all his knowledge to the disposal of the police. Naturally, he had no doubt of that Cadogan West was guilty, but all the rest was inconceivable. You cannot throw any new light upon the affair? I know nothing myself, save what I have read or heard. I had no desire to be discourteous, but you can understand, Mr. Holmes, that we are much disturbed at present, and I must ask you to hasten this interview to an end. This is indeed an unexpected development, said my friend, when we had regained the cab. I wonder if the death was natural, or whether the poor old fellow killed himself. If the latter, may it be taken as some sign of self-reproach for duty neglected? We must leave that question to the future. Now we shall turn to Cadogan West. A small but well-kept house in the outskirts of the town sheltered the bereaved mother. The old lady was too dazed with grief to be of any use to us, but at her side was a white-faced young lady, who introduced herself as Miss Violet Westbury, the fiancée of the dead man, and the last to see him upon that fatal night. "I can explain it, Mr. Holmes," said she. "I have not shut an eye since the tragedy, thinking night and day what the true meaning of it can be. Arthur was the most single-minded, chivalrous, patriotic man upon the earth. He would have cut his right hand off before he would sell a state secret confiding to his keeping. It is absurd, impossible, preposterous to anyone who knew him." "But the facts, Miss Westbury?" Yes, I admit I cannot explain them." "Was he in any want of money?" "No. His needs were very simple and his salary ample. He had saved a few hundred, and we were to marry at the New Year." "No signs of any mental excitement? Come, Miss Westbury, be absolutely frank with us." The quick eye of my companion had noted some change in her manner. She colored and hesitated. "Yes," she said at last, "I had a feeling that there was something on his mind." "For long?" "Only for the last week or so. He was thoughtful and worried. Once I pressured him about it. He admitted that there was something, and that it was concerned with his official life. It is too serious for me to speak about, even to you," said he. "I could get nothing more." Holmes looked grave. "Go on, Miss Westbury. Even if it seems to tell against him, go on. We cannot say what it may lead to." "Indeed, I have nothing more to tell. Once or twice it seemed to me that he was on the point of telling me something. He spoke one evening of the importance of the secret, and I have some recollection that he said that no doubt foreign spies would pay a great deal to have it." My friend's face grew graver still. "Anything else?" "He said that we were slack about such matters, that it would be easy for a traitor to get the plans." "Was it only recently that he made such remarks?" "Yes, quite recently." "Now tell us of that evening." "We were to go to the theatre. The fog was so thick that a cab was useless. We walked, and our way took us close to the office. Suddenly he darted away into the fog." "Without a word?" "He gave an exclamation. That was all. I waited, but he never returned. Then I walked home. Next morning, after the office opened, they came to inquire. About 12 o'clock we heard the terrible news. Oh, Mr. Holmes, if you could only save his honor, it would It was so much to him. Okay, an aside. I, if I am walking in super foggy, weird conditions, and we pass the office of a friend, a partner, whoever it may be, and this person that I'm walking with makes an exclamation and runs into the office, and one, why didn't you immediately follow? And two, why would you just go home? Why wouldn't if even if they were like, be right back or just a minute or something like that, like wouldn't you like be like, all right, wait a little bit and then go after them? I don't understand. I don't understand. Although I do not have society manners, but don't delve into my foggy business. Fair. You're right. You're right. That's fair. Ugh, okay. Terrible news, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Holmes shook his head sadly. Come, Watson, said he. Our way lies elsewhere. Our next station. Oh, yep. Our way lies elsewhere. Our next station must be the office from which the papers were taken. It was black enough before against this man, but our inquiries make it blacker, he remarked as the cab lumbered off. His coming marriage gives a motive for the crime. He naturally wanted money. The idea was in his head, since he spoke about it. He nearly made the girl an accomplice in the treason by telling her his plans. It is all very bad. But surely, Holmes, character goes for something. Then again, why should he leave the girl in the street and dart away to commit a felony? Exactly. There are certainly objections, but it is a formidable case which they have to meet. Mr. Sidney Johnson, the senior clerk, met us at the office and received us with that respect which my companion's card already commanded. He was a thin, gruff, bespectacled man of middle age, his cheeks haggard, and his hands twitching from the nervous strain to which he had been subjected. It is bad, Holmes, very bad. Who is speaking? Mr. Sidney Johnson, I guess. Okay. Pop, pop, pop. I don't think we have a voice for him. Oh well. It's bad, Mr. Holmes, very bad. Have you heard the death of the chief? We have just come from his house. The place is disorganized. The chief dead, Cadogan West dead, our papers stolen, and yet, when we closed our door on Monday evening, we were as efficient in office as any of the government service. Good God, it's dreadful to think of, that West, of all men, should have done such a thing. You are sure of his guilt, then? I can see no other way out of it, and yet I would have trusted him as I trust myself. At what hour was the office closed on Monday? At 5. Did you close it? I am always the last man out. Where were the plans? In that safe. Put them there myself. Is there no watchman to the building? There is, but he has other departments to look after as well. He's an old soldier and a most trustworthy man. He saw nothing that evening. Of course, the fog was very thick. Suppose that Cadogan West wished to make his way into the building after hours. He would need 3 keys, would he not, before he could reach the papers? Yes, he would. The key to the outer door, the key to the office, and the key to the safe. Only Sir James Walter and you had those keys. I had no keys of the door, only of the safe. Was Sir James a man who had orderly in his habits? Who was orderly in his habits? Yes, I think he was. I know that, so far as those 3 keys are concerned, he kept them on the same ring. I have often seen them there. And that ring went with him to London? You said so. And your key never left your possession? Never. Then West, if he is the culprit, must have had a duplicate, and yet none was found on his body. One other point. If a clerk in his office desired to sell the plans, would it not be simpler to copy the plans for himself than to make the originals, as was actually done? it would take considerable technical knowledge to copy the plans in an efficient way. But I suppose either Sir James or you or West had that technical knowledge? No doubt we had, but I beg you won't try to drag me into the matter, Mr. Holmes. What is the use of our speculating in this way when the original plans were actually found on West? Well, it is certainly singular that he should run the risk of taking originals if he could safely have taken copies, which would have equally served his turn. Singular, no doubt, and yet he did so. Every inquiry in this case reveals something inexplicable. Now there are 3 papers still missing. There are, as I understand, the vital ones. Yes, that is so. Do you mean to say that anyone holding these 3 papers, and without the 7 others, could construct a Bruce Partington submarine? I reported to that effect to the Admiralty, but today I have been over the drawings again, and I am not so sure of it. The double valves of the automatic self-adjusting slots are drawn in on the papers which have been returned. Until the foreigners had invented that for themselves, they could not make the boat. Of course, they might soon get over the difficulty. But the 3 missing drawings are the most important. Undoubtedly. I think, with your permission, I will now take a stroll round the premises. I do not recall any other question which I desired to ask. He examined the lock of the safe, door of the room, and finally the iron shutters of the window. It was only when we were on the lawn outside that his interest was strongly excited. There was a laurel bush outside the window, and several of the branches bore signs of having been twisted or snapped. He examined them carefully with his lens, and then some dim and vague marks upon the earth beneath. Finally, he asked the chief clerk to close the iron shutters, and he pointed out to me that they hardly met in the center, and that it would be possible for anyone outside to see what was going on within the room. The indications are ruined by the 3 days' delay. They may mean something or nothing. Well, Watson, I do not think that Woolwich can help us further. It is a small crop which we have gathered. Let us see if we can do better in London. Yet we added 1 more sheaf to our harvest before we left Woolwich Station. The clerk in the ticket office was able to say with confidence that he saw Cadogan West, whom he knew well by sight, upon the Monday night, and that he went to London by the 8:15 to London Bridge. He was alone, and took a single 3rd-class ticket. The clerk was struck at the time by his excited and nervous manner. So shaky was he that he could hardly pick up his change, and the clerk had helped him with it. A reference to the timetable showed that the 8:15 was the first train which it was possible for West to take after he had left the lady about 7:30. "Let us reconstruct, Watson," said Holmes, after half an hour of silence. I am not aware that in all our joint researches we have ever had a case which was more difficult to get at. Every fresh advance which we make only reveals a fresh ridge beyond. And yet we have surely made some appreciable progress. The effect of our inquiries at Woolwich has been the main... Let's start that over. The effect of our inquiries at Woolwich has in the main been against young Cadogan West, but the indications at the window would lend themselves to a more favorable hypothesis. Let us suppose, for example, that he had been approached by some foreign agent. It might have been done under such pledges as would have prevented him from speaking of it, and yet would have affected his thoughts in the direction indicated by his remarks to his fiancée. Very good. We will now suppose that as he went to the theatre with the young lady, he suddenly, in the fog, caught a glimpse of this same agent going in the direction of the office. He was an impetuous man, quick in his decisions. Everything gave way to his duty. He followed the man, reached the window, saw the abstraction of the documents, and pursued the thief. In this way we get over the objection that no one would take originals when he could make copies. This outsider had to take originals. So far, it holds together. What is the next step? Then we come into difficulties. One would imagine that under such circumstances the first act of young Cadogan West would be to seize the villain and raise the alarm. Why did he not do so? Could it have been an official superior who took the papers? That would explain West's conduct. Or could the chief have given West the slip in the fog, and West started at once to London to head him off from his own rooms, presuming that he knew where the rooms were? The call must have been very pressing, since he left his girl standing in the fog and made no effort to communicate with her. Our scent runs cold here, and there is a vast gap between either hypothesis and the laying of West's body. With several papers in his pockets, on the roof of a metropolitan train. My instinct now is to work from the other end. If Mycroft had given us the list of addresses, we may be able to pick our man and follow 2 tracks instead of 1. Surely enough, a note awaited us at Baker Street. A government message had brought it post-haste. Holmes glanced at it and threw it over to me. There are numerous small fry, but few who would handle so big an affair. The only men worth considering are Adolph Meyer, of 13 Great George Street, Windminster, Lewis, of Campden Mansions, Notting Hill, and Hugo Oberstein, 13 Caulfield Gardens, Kensington. The latter was known to be in town on Monday and is now reported as having left. Glad to hear you have seen some light. The cabinet awaits your final report with the utmost anxiety. Urgent representations have arrived from the very highest quarter. The whole force of the state is at your back, if you should need it. Signed, Mycroft. I'm afraid, said Holmes, smiling, that all the Queen's horses and all the Queen's men cannot avail in this matter. He had spread out his big map of London and leaned eagerly over it. Well, well, said he presently, with an exclamation of satisfaction, things are turning a little in our direction at last. Why, Watson, I do honestly believe that we are going to pull it off, after all. He slapped me on the shoulder with a sudden burst of hilarity. I am going out now. It is only a reconnaissance. I will do nothing serious without my trusted comrade and biographer at my elbow. Do you stay here? Do stay here, and the odds are that you will see me again in an hour or 2. If time hangs heavy, get foolscap and a pen, and begin your narrative of how we saved the state. I felt some reflection of his elation in my own mind, for I knew well that he would not depart so far from his usual austerity of demeanor unless there was good cause for exultation. All the long November evening I waited, filled with impatience for his return. At last, shortly after 9 o'clock, there arrived a messenger with a note. Am dining at Goldini's restaurant, Gloucester Road, Kensington. Please come at once and join me there. Bring with you a jemmy, a dark lantern, a chisel, and a revolver. S.H. It was a nice equipment for a respectable citizen to carry through the dim, fog-draped streets. I stowed them all discreetly away in my overcoat and drove straight to the address given. There sat my friend at a little round table near the door of the garish Italian restaurant. Have you had something to eat? Then join me in a coffee and a curacao. Try one of the proprietor's cigars. They are less poisonous than one would expect. Have you the tools? They are here in my overcoat. Excellent. Let me give you a short sketch of what I have done, with some indication of what you are about to do. Now, it must be evident to you, Watson, that this young man's body was placed on the roof of the train. That was clear from the instant that I determined the fact that it was from the roof and not from the carriage that he had fallen. Could it not have been dropped from a bridge? I should say it was impossible. If you examine the roofs, you will find that they are slightly rounded, and that there is no railing around them. Therefore, we can say for certain that young Cadogan West was placed on it. How could he be placed there? That was the question which we had to answer. There is only one possible way. You are aware that the underground runs clear of tunnels at some points in the West End. I had a vague memory that as I have travelled by it, I have occasionally seen windows just above my head. Now, suppose that a train halted under such a window. Would there be any difficulty in laying a body upon the roof? It seems most improbable. We must fall back upon the old axiom that when all other contingencies fail, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Here all other contingencies have failed. When I found that the leading international agent, who had just left London, lived in a row of houses which abutted upon the underground, I was so pleased that you were a little astonished at my sudden frivolity. Oh, that was it, was it? Yes, that was it. Mr. Hugo Oberstein, of 13 Caulfield Gardens, had become my objective. I began my operations at Gloucester Road Station, where a very helpful official walked with me along the track and allowed me to satisfy myself not only that the back-stair windows of Caulfield Gardens open on the line, but the even more essential fact that, owing to the intersection of one of the larger railways, the underground trains are frequently held motionless for some minutes at that very spot. Splendid, Holmes. You've got it. So far, Watson. We advance, but the goal is afar. Well, having seen the back of Caulfield Gardens, I visited the front, and satisfied myself that the bird was, indeed, flown. It is a considerable house, unfurnished, so far as I could judge, in the upper rooms. Oberstein lived there with a single valet, who was probably a confederate entirely in his confidence. We must bear in mind that Oberstein had gone to the Continent to dispose of his body, but not with an idea of flight, for he had no reason to fear a warrant, and the idea of an amateur domiciliary visit would certainly never occur to him. Yet that is precisely what we are about to make. Could we not get a warrant and legalize it? Hardly on the evidence. What can we hope to do? We cannot tell what correspondence may be there. I don't like it, Holmes. My dear fellow, you shall keep watch in the street. I'll do the criminal part. It's not a time to stick at trifles. Think of Mycroft's note, of the Admiralty, the Cabinet, the exalted person who waits for news. We are bound to go. My answer was to rise from the table. You are right, Holmes. We are bound to go. He sprang up and shook me by the hand. I knew you would not shrink at the last, said he, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes which was nearer to tenderness than I had ever seen. The next instant he was his masterful, practical self once more. It is nearly half a mile, but there is no hurry. Let us walk, said he. Don't drop the instruments, I beg. Your arrest as a suspicious character would be a most unfortunate complication. Caulfield Gardens was one of those lines of flat-faced, pillared, and porticoed houses which was so prominent a product of the Middle Victorian epoch in the West End of London. Next door there appeared to be a children's party, for the merry buzz of young voices and the chatter of a piano resounded through the night. The fog still hung about and screened us with its friendly shade. Holmes had lit his lantern and flashed it upon the massive door. "This is a serious proposition," said he. "It is certainly bolted, as well as locked. We would do better in the area. There is an excellent archway down yonder in case a too zealous policeman should intrude. Give me a hand, Watson, and I'll do the same for you." A minute later, we were both in the area. Hardly had we reached the dark shadows before the step of the policeman was heard in the fog above. As its soft rhythm died away, Holmes set to work upon the lower door. I saw him stoop and strain until, with a sharp crash, it flew open. We sprang through into the dark passage, closing the area door behind us. Holmes led the way up the curving, uncarpeted stair. His little fan of yellow light shone upon a low window. "Here we are, Watson. This must be the one." He threw it open, and as he did so there was a low, harsh murmur, growing steadily into a louder roar as a train dashed past us in the darkness. Holmes swept his light along the window-sill. It was thickly coated with soot from the passing engines, but the black surface was blurred and rubbed in places. "You can see where they rested the body." "What is this? There can be no doubt that it was a blood mark." He was pointing to faint discolorations along the woodwork of the window. "Here it is on the stone of the stair, too. The demonstration is complete. Let us stay here until a train stops." We had not long to wait. The very next train roared from the tunnel as before, but slowed in the open, and then, with a creaking of brakes, pulled up immediately beneath us. It was not 4 feet from the window ledge to the roof on the carriages. Holmes swiftly closed the window. "So far we are justified," said he. "What do you think of it, Watson?" "A masterpiece. We have never risen to a greater height." "I cannot agree with you there. From the moment that I conceived the idea of the body being upon the roof, which surely was not a very abstruse one, all the rest was inevitable. If it were not for the grave interests involved, the affair upon this point would be insignificant. Our difficulties are still before us, but perhaps we may find something here which may help us." We had ascended the kitchen stair and entered the suite of rooms upon the first floor. One was a dining room, severely furnished and containing nothing of interest. A second was a bedroom, which also drew blank. The remaining room appeared more promising, and my companion settled down to a systematic examination. It was littered with books and papers, and was evidently used as a study. Swiftly and methodically Holmes turned over the contents of drawer after drawer and cupboard after cupboard, but no gleam of success came to brighten his austere face. At the end of an hour he was no further than we had started. "The cunning dog has covered his tracks," said he. "He has left nothing to incriminate him. His dangerous correspondence has been destroyed or removed. This was our last chance." Holmes better stay away from my pogs. That's all I'm saying. It was a small tin cash box which stood upon the writing desk. Holmes pried it open with his chisel. Several rolls of paper were within, covered with figures and calculations, without any note to show to who they referred. The recurring words, "water pressure," and "pressure to the square inch," suggested some possible relation to a submarine. Holmes tossed them all impatiently aside. There only remained an envelope with some small newspaper slips inside it. He shook them out on the table, and at once I saw by his eager face that his hopes had been raised. "What's this, Watson? What's this? Record of a series of messages in the advertisements of a paper. Daily Telegraph. Agony column by the print and paper. Right hand top corner of a page. No dates, but messages arrange themselves. This must be the first." Second story in a row that we are finding clues and messages, secret messages in the agony column of the Daily Telegraph. Well, I guess it was the Daily Gazette last time, so we're switching it up a little bit. "Hope to hear sooner. Terms agreed to. Write fully to address given on card. Pirro." Next comes. Too complex for descriptions. Must have full report. Stuff awaits you when goods delivered. Pirro. Then comes. Matter presses. Must withdraw offer unless contract completed. Make appointment by letter. We'll confirm by advertisement. Pirro. Finally. Monday night after 9. 2 taps. Only ourselves. Do not be suspicious. Payment in hard cash when goods delivered. Pirro. A fairly complete record, Watson. If we could only get at the man at the other end. He sat lost in thought, tapping his fingers on the table. Finally, he sprang to his feet. Well, perhaps it won't be so difficult after all. There is nothing more to be done here, Watson. I think we might drive round to the offices of the Daily Telegraph, and so bring a good day's work to a conclusion. Mycroft Holmes and Lestrade had come round by appointment after breakfast next day, and Sherlock Holmes had recounted to them our proceedings of the day before. The professional shook his head over our confessed burglary. "We can't do these things in the force, Mr. Holmes," said he. "No wonder you get results that are beyond us. But some of these days you'll go too far, and you'll find yourself and your friend in trouble. For England, home and beauty, eh, Watson? Murder's on the altar of our country. But what do you think of it, Mycroft?" "Excellent, Sherlock. Admirable. And what use will you make of it?" Holmes picked up the Daily Telegraph, which lay upon the table. "Have you seen Pirrot's advertisement today?" "What? Another?" "Yes, here it is. Tonight. Same hour. Same place. 2 taps. Most vitally important. Your own safety at risk. Pirrot." "By George," cried Lestrade, "if he answers that, we've got him." "That was my idea when I put it in. I think if you could both make it convenient to come with us about 8 o'clock to Caulfield Gardens, we might possibly get a little nearer to a solution." One of the most remarkable characteristics of Sherlock Holmes was his power of throwing his brain out of action and switching all his thoughts on to lighter things whenever he had convinced himself that he could no longer work to advantages. I remember that during the whole of that memorial day he lost himself in a monograph which he had undertaken upon the polyphonic motets of Lassus. For my own part, I had none of this power of detachment, and the day, in consequence, appeared to be interminable. The great national importance of the issue, the suspense in high quarters, the direct nature of the experiment which we were trying, all combined to work upon my nerve. It was a relief to me when at last, after a light dinner, we set out upon our expedition. Lestrade and Mycroft met us by appointment at the outside of Gloucester Road Station. The area door of Oberstein's house had been left open the night before, and it was necessary for me, as Mycroft Holmes absolutely and indignantly declined to climb the railings, to pass in and upon the hall door. By 9 o'clock we were all seated in the study, waiting patiently for our man. An hour passed, and yet another. When 11 o'clock struck, the measured beat of the great church clock seemed to sound the dirge of our hopes. Lestrade and Mycroft were fidgeting in their seats and looking twice a minute at their watches. Holmes sat silent and composed, his eyelids half shut, but every sense on the alert. He raised his head with a sudden jerk. "He is coming," said he. There had been a furtive step past the door. Now it returned. We heard a shuffling sound outside, and then 2 sharp taps with the knocker. Holmes rose, motioning to us to remain seated. The gas in the hall was a mere point of light. He opened the outer door, and then, as a tall figure slipped past him, he closed and fastened it. "This way," we heard him say, and a moment later our man stood before us. Holmes had followed him closely, and as the man turned with a cry of surprise and alarm, he caught him by the collar and threw him back into the room. Before our prisoner had recovered his balance, the door was shut, and Holmes standing with his back against it. The man glared round him, staggered, and fell senseless upon the floor. With the shock, his broad-brimmed hat flew from his head, his cravat slipped down from his lips, and there were the long light beard and the soft, handsome, delicate features of Colonel Valentine Walter. Holmes gave a whistle of surprise. "You can write me down an ass this time, Watson," said he. "This was not the bird I was looking for." "Who is he?" asked Mycroft eagerly. "The younger brother of the late Sir James Walter, the head of the submarine department. Yes, yes, I see the fall of the cards. He is coming too. I think that you had best leave his examination to me." He had carried the prostrate body to the sofa. Now our prisoner sat up, looked round him with a horror-stricken face, and passed his hand over his forehead, like one who cannot believe his own senses. "What is this?" he asked. "I came here to visit Mr. Oberstein." "Everything is known, Colonel Walter," said Holmes. "How an English gentleman could behave in such a manner is beyond my comprehension, but your whole correspondence and relations with Oberstein are within our knowledge. So also are the circumstances connected with the death of young Cadogan West. Let me advise you to gain at least the small credit for repenitence and confession, since there are still some details which we can only learn from your lips." The man groaned and sank his face in his hands. We waited, but he was silent. "I can assure you," said Holmes, "that every essential is already known. We know that you were pressed for money, that you took an impress of the key which your brother held, and that you entered into a correspondence with Oberstein, who answered your letters through the advertisement columns of the Daily Telegraph. We are aware that you went down to the office in the fog on Monday night, but that you were seen and followed by young Cadogan West, who had probably some previous reason to suspect you. He saw your theft, but could not give the alarm, as it was just possible that you were taking the papers to your brother in London. Leaving all his private concerns, like the good citizen that he was, he followed you closely in the fog, and kept at your heels until you reached this very house. There he intervened, and then it was, Colonel Walter, that to treason you added the terrible crime of murder." Bum, bum, bum! "I did not! I did not! Before God, I swear that I did not!" cried our wretched prisoner. That was not the voice that I used for him earlier, and I apologize. "Tell us, then, how Cadogan West met his end before you laid him upon the roof of a railway carriage." "I will. I swear to you that I will. I did the rest. I confess it. It was just as you say. A stock exchange debt had to be paid. I needed the money badly. Oberstein offered me 5,000. It was to save myself from ruin. But as to murder, I am as innocent as you." "What happened then?" "He had his suspicions before, and he followed me as you describe. I never knew it until I was at the very door. It was thick fog, and one could not see 3 yards. I had given 2 taps, and Oberstein had come to the door. The young man rushed up and demanded to know what we were about to do with the papers. Oberstein had a short life-preserver. He always carried it with him. As West forced his way after us into the house, Oberstein struck him on the head. The blow was a fatal one. He was dead within 5 minutes. There he lay in the hall, and we were at our wits' end what to do. Then Oberstein had this idea about the trains which halted under his back window. But first he examined the papers which I had brought. He said that 3 of them were essential and that he must keep them. "You cannot keep them," said I. "There will be a dreadful row at Woolwich if they are not returned." "I must keep them," said he, "for they are so technical that it is impossible in the time to make copies." Then they must all go back together tonight," said I. He thought for a little, and then he carried out that he had it. "3 I will keep," said he. "The others we will stuff into the pocket of this young man. When he is found, the whole business will assuredly be put to his account." I could see no other way out of it, so we did as he suggested. We waited half an hour at the window before a train stopped. It was so thick that nothing could be seen, and we had no difficulty in lowering West's body on the train. That was the end of the matter as far as I was concerned. "And your brother?" "He said nothing, but he had caught me once with his keys, and I think that he suspected. I read it in his eyes that he suspected. As you know, he never held up his head again." There was silence in the room. It was broken by Mycroft Holmes. "Can you not make reparations? It would ease your conscience, and possibly your punishment." "What reparations can I make?" "Where is Oberstein with the papers?" "I do not know." Did he give you an address?" He said that letters to the Hotel du Louvre, Paris, would eventually reach him." "Then reparations is still within your power," said Sherlock Holmes. "I will do anything I can. I owe this fellow no particular goodwill. He has been my ruin and my downfall. Here are the papers and pen. Sit at this desk and write to my dictation. Direct the envelope to the address given. That is right. Now the letter. Dear Sir, with regard to our transaction, you will no doubt have observed by now that one essential detail is missing. I have a tracing which will make it complete. This has involved me in extra trouble, however, and I must ask you for a further advance of £500. I will not trust it to the post, nor will I take anything but gold or notes. I would come to you abroad, but it would excite remark if I left the country at present. Therefore, I shall expect to meet you in the smoking room of the Charing Cross Hotel at noon on Saturday. Remember that only English notes or gold will be taken." "That will do very well. I shall be very much surprised if it does not fetch our man." And it did. It is a matter of history, that secret history of a nation, which is almost so much more intimate and interesting than its public chronicles, that Oberstein, eager to complete the coup of his life, came to the lure and was safely engulfed for 15 years in a British prison. In his trunk were found the invaluable Bruce Partington plans which he had put up for auction in all the naval centers of Europe. Colonel Walter died in prison towards the end of the second year of his sentence. As to Holmes, he returned fresh to his monograph upon the polyphonic motets of Lassus, which has since been printed for private circulation, and is said by experts to be the last word upon the subject. Some weeks afterwards I learned incidentally that my friend spent a day at Windsor, whence he returned with a remarkably fine emerald tie-pin. When I asked him if he had bought it, he answered that it was a present from a certain gracious lady in whose interests he had once been fortunate enough to carry out a small commission. He said no more, but I fancy that I could guess at that lady's august name, and I have little doubt that the emerald pin will forever recall to my friend's memory the adventure of the Bruce Paddington plans. End of that story. I enjoyed it. I mean, I've enjoyed all of them so far. There's not one where I'm like, not for me. I did like that I was right, that that's not where he was killed. I was like, ooh, I got that part right. I did not think that he would have been placed on top of the train, but I guess that makes sense. It's pretty smart. It's pretty clever, if you say. Um, Sure, able to pick up a name. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we do have time for one more, so let's do it. Ooh, it has a fun title too. The Adventure of the Dying Detective. Yeah, Intelligence of Sherlock Holmes. It's subconsciously or unconsciously seeping through your brain and making you that much smarter and observant and able to deduce crimes. You're welcome. It's like osmosis. But I guess that would only work if like on your head. So maybe it's not like osmosis. It's just subconscious. Like when in Dexter's laboratory when he goes to sleep and he's listening to French and then he can only speak French. When you wake up, you're only going to be able to solve crimes. Fine. All right, one more sip. Omelette du fromage. Exactly. Exactly. You get it. Okay. The Adventure of the Dying Detective. Mrs. Hudson, the landlady of Sherlock Holmes, was a long-suffering woman. Not only was her first-floor flat invaded at all hours by throngs of singular and often undesirable characters, but her remarkable lodger showed an eccentricity and irregularity in his life which must have sorely tried her patience. His incredible untidiness, his addiction to music at strange hours, his occasional revolver practice within his doors, his weird and often malodorous scientific experiments, and the atmosphere of violence and danger which hung around him made him the very worst tenant in London. On the other hand, his payments were princely. I have no doubt that the house might have been purchased at the price which Holmes paid for his rooms during the years that I was with him. The landlady stood in the deepest awe of him and never dared to interfere with him, however outrageous his proceedings might seem. She was fond of him, too, for he had a remarkable gentleness and courtesy in his dealings with women. He disliked and distrusted the sex. We know, Sherlock, we know. But he was always a chivalrous opponent. Knowing how genuine was her regard for him, I listened earnestly to her story when she came to my rooms in the second year of my married life and told me of the sad condition to which my poor friend was reduced. "He's dying, Dr. Watson," said she. "For 3 days he had been sinking, and I doubt if he will last the day. He would not let me get a doctor. This morning, when I saw his bones sticking out of his face and his great bright eyes looking at me, I could stand it no more. With your leave, or without it, Mr. Holmes, I am going for a doctor this very hour," said I. "Let it be then. Let it be Watson, then," said he. "I wouldn't waste an hour in coming to him, sir, or you may not see him alive." I was horrified, for I had heard nothing of his illness. I need not say that I rushed for my coat and my hat. As we drove back, I asked for the details. "There is little I can tell you, sir. He has been working at the case down at Rotherhithe, in an alley near the river, and he has brought his illness back with him. He took to his bed on Wednesday afternoon and has never moved since. For these 3 days neither food nor drink has passed his lips." "Good God, why did no one call for a doctor?" "He wouldn't have it, sir. You know how masterful he is. I didn't dare to disobey him. But he's not long for this world, as you'll see for yourself the moment that you set eyes on him." He was, indeed, a deplorable spectacle. In the dim light of a foggy November day, the sick room was a gloomy spot. But it was that gaunt, wasted face staring at me from the bed which sent a chill to my heart. His eyes had the brightness of fever. There was a hectic flush upon either cheek, and the dark crusts clung to his lips. The thin hands upon the coverlet twitched incessantly. His voice was croaking and spasmodic. He lay listlessly as I entered the room, but the sight of me brought a gleam of recognition to his eyes. "Well, Watson, we seem to have fallen upon evil days," said he in a feeble voice, but with something of his old carelessness of manner. "My dear fellow," I cried, approaching him. "Stand back. Stand right back," said he with the sharp imperiousness which I had associated only with moments of crisis. "If you approach me, Watson, I shall order you out of the house." "But why?" "Because it is my desire. Is that not enough?" Yes, Mrs. Hudson was right. He was more masterful than ever. It was pitiful, however, to see his exhaustion. "I only wished to help," I explained. "Exactly. You will help best by doing what you are told." "Certainly, Holmes." He relaxed the austerity of his manner. "You are not angry?" he asked, gasping for breath. Poor devil, how could I be angry when I saw him lying in such plight before me? "It's for your own sake, Watson," he croaked. For my sake? I know what is the matter with me. It is a coolie disease from Sumatra, a thing that the Dutch know more about than we, though they have made little of it up to date. One thing only is certain. It is infallibly deadly, and it is horribly contagious. He spoke now with a feverish energy, the long hands twitching and jerking as he motioned me away. Contagious by touch, Watson. That's it, by touch. Keep your distance, and all is well. Good heavens, Holmes, do you suppose that such a consideration weighs with me for an instant? It would not affect me in the case of a stranger. Do you imagine it would prevent me from doing my duty to so good a friend? Again I advanced, but he repulsed me with a look of furious anger. If you will stand there, I will talk. If you do not, you must leave the room. I have so deep a respect for the extraordinary qualities of Holmes that I have always deferred to his wishes, even when I least understood them. But now all my professional instincts were aroused. Let him be my master elsewhere. I, at least, was his in a sick room. Holmes, said I, you are not yourself. A sick man is but a child, and so I will treat you. Whether you like it or not, I will examine your symptoms and treat you for them. He looked at me with venomous eyes. If I am to have a doctor, whether I will or not, let me at least have someone in whom I have confidence, said he. Then you have none in me? In your friendships, certainly. But facts are facts, Watson. And, after all, you are only a general practitioner with very limited experience and mediocre qualifications. It is painful to have to say these things, but you leave me no choice. I was bitterly hurt. Such a remark is unworthy of you, Holmes. It shows me very clearly the state of your own nerves. But if you have no confidence in me, I would not intrude my services. Let me bring Sir Jasper Meek or Penrose Fisher to any of the best men in London. But someone you must have, and that is final. If you think I am going to stand here and see you die without either helping you myself or bringing anyone else to help you, then you have mistaken your man. You mean well, Watson, said the sick man with something between a sob and a groan. Shall I demonstrate your own ignorance? What do you know, pray, of Pepanuli fever? What do you know of Black Formosa corruption? I have never heard of either. There are many problems of disease, many strange, pathological possibilities in the East, Watson. He paused after each sentence to collect his failing strength. I have learned so much during some recent researches which have medico-criminal aspect. There we go. It was in the course of them that I contracted this complaint. You can do nothing. Possibly not, but I happen to know that Dr. Ainstree, the best living authority upon tropical disease, is now in London. All remonstrance is useless, Holmes. I am going this instant to fetch him. I turned resolutely to the door. That is Sherlock's sick voice. It almost sounds like his normal voice, but it's a little bit sicker. Never have I had such a shock. In an instant, with a tiger spring, the dying man had intercepted me. I heard the sharp snap of a twisted key. The next moment he had staggered back to his bed, exhausted and panting after his one tremendous outflame of energy. You won't take the key from me by force, Watson. I've got you, my friend. Here you are, and here you will stay until I will otherwise. I'll humor you. And this in little gasps with terrible struggles for breath between. I guess I should be doing a more, sickly voice, but... Alright, here we go. I was about to do a voice, and I was like, no, that's gonna sound like The Godfather. Like a terrible Godfather impression. You've only my own good at heart. Of course, I know that very well. You shall have your way. But give me time to get my strength. Not now, Watson, not now. It's 4 o'clock. At 6 you can go. This is insanity, Holmes. Only 2 hours, Watson. I promise you will go at 6. Are you content to wait? I seem to have no choice. None in the world, Watson. Thank you. I need no help in arranging the clothes. You will please keep your distance. Now, Watson, there is one other condition that I would make. You will seek help, not from the man you mention, but from the one that I choose. By all means. The first 3 sensible words that you have uttered since you entered this room. Watson, you will find some books over there. I am somewhat exhausted. I wonder how a battery feels when it pours electricity into a non-conductor. At 6, Watson, we will resume our conversation. But it was destined to be resumed long before that hour, and in circumstances which gave me a shock hardly second to that caused by his spring to the door. I had stood for some minutes looking at the silent figure in the bed. His face was almost covered by the cloth that he appeared to be asleep. Then, unable to settle down to reading, I walked slowly round the room, examining the pictures of celebrated criminals with which every wall was adorned. Finally, in my aimless perambulation, there we go, I came to the mantelpiece. A litter of pipes, tobacco pouches, syringes, penknives, revolver cartridges, and other debris was scattered over it. In the midst of these was a small black and white ivory box with a sliding lid. It was a neat little thing, and I had stretched out my hand to examine it more closely when it was a dreadful cry that he gave, a yell which might have been heard down the street. My skin went cold, and my hair bristled at that horrible scream. As I turned, I caught a glimpse of a convulsed face and frantic eyes. I stood paralyzed, with the little box in my own hand. "Put it down! Down this instant, Watson! This instant, I say!" His head sank back upon the pillow, and he gave a deep sigh of relief as I replaced the box upon the mantelpiece. "I hate to have my things touched, Watson. You know that I hate it. You fidget me beyond endurance. You, a doctor, you are enough to drive a patient into an asylum. Sit down, man, and let me have my rest." The incident left a most unpleasant impression upon my mind. The violent and causeless excitement, followed by this brutality of speech, so far removed from his usual suavity, showed me how deep was the disorganization of his mind. Of all ruins, that of a noble mind is the most deplorable. I sat in silent dejection until the stipulated time had passed. He seemed to have been watching the clock as well as I, for it was hardly 6 before he began to talk with the same feverish animation as before. "Now, Watson," said he, "have you any change in your pocket?" "Yes." "Any silver?" "A good deal." "How many half-crowns?" "I have 5. Too few, too few. How very unfortunate, Watson. However, such as they are, you can put them in your watch pocket, and all the rest of your money in your left trouser pocket. Thank you. It will balance you so much better like that." This was raving insanity. He shuddered and again made a sound between a cough and a sob. "You will now light the gas, Watson, but you will be very careful that not one instant shall it be more than half on. I implore you to be careful, Watson. Thank you. That is excellent. Now you need not draw the blind. Now you will have the kindness to place some letters and papers upon this table within my reach. Thank you. Now some of that litter from the mantelpiece. Excellent, Watson. This is a sugar tongs there. Kindly raise that small ivory box with its assistance. Place it here among the papers. Good. Now you can go and fetch Mr. Culverton Smith of 13 Lower Burke Street." To tell the truth, my desire to fetch a doctor had somewhat weakened, for poor Holmes was so obviously delirious that it seemed dangerous to leave him. However, he was as eager now to consult the person named as he had been obstinate in refusing. "I never heard the name," said I. "Possibly not, my good Watson. It may surprise you to know that the man upon earth who is best versed in this disease is not a medical man, but a planter. Mr. Culverton Smith is a well-known resident of Sumatra, now visiting London. An outbreak of the disease upon his plantation, which was distant from medical aid, caused him to study it himself, with some rather far-reaching consequences. He is a very methodical person, and I did not desire you to start before 6 because I was well aware that you would not find him in his study. If you could persuade him to come here and give us the benefit of his unique experience of this disease, the investigation of which has been his dearest hobby, I cannot doubt that he would help me. I give Holmes's remarks as a consecutive whole, and will not attempt to indicate how they were interrupted by gaspings for breath and whole clutchings of his hands, which indicated the pain from which he was suffering. His appearance had changed from the worse during the few hours that I had been with him. Those hectic spots were more pronounced, the eyes shone more brightly out of darker hollows, and a cold sweat glimmered upon his brow. He still retained, however, the jaunty gallantry of his speech. To the last gasp he would always be the master. "You will tell him exactly how you have left me," said he. "You will convey the very impression which he is in your own mind, a dying man, a dying and delirious man. Indeed, I cannot think why the whole bed of the ocean is not one solid mass of oysters. So prolific the creature seems. Ah, I am wandering. Strange how the brain controls the brain. What was I saying, Watson?" "My directions for Mr. Culverton Smith." "Ah, yes, I remember. My life depends upon it. Plead with him, Watson. There is no good feeling between us. His nephew, Watson. I had suspicions of foul play, and I allowed him to see it. The boy died horribly. He has a grudge against me. You will soften him, Watson. Beg him, pray him, get him here by any means. He can save me. Only he. I will bring him in a cab, if I have to carry him down to it." "You will do nothing of the sort. You will persuade him to come, and then you will return in front of him. Make any excuse as to not come with him. Don't forget, Watson, you won't fail me. You never did fail me. No doubt there are natural enemies which limit the increase of this creature. You and I, Watson, we have done our part. Shall the world, then, be overrun by oysters? No, no, horrible. They'll convey all that is in your mind." I left him full of the image of this magnificent intellect babbling, like a foolish child. He had handed me the key, and with a happy thought I took it with me, lest he should lock himself in. Mrs. Hudson was waiting, trembling and weeping, in the passage. Behind me, as I passed from the flat, I heard Holmes's high, thin voice in some delirious chant. Below, as I stood whistling for a cab, a man came on me through the fog. "How is Mr. Holmes, sir?" he asked. It was an old acquaintance, Inspector Morton, of Scotland Yard, dressed in unofficial tweeds. "He is very ill," I answered. He looked at me in a most singular fashion. Had it not been too fiendish, I could have imagined that the gleam of the fanlight showed exultation in his face. "I had heard some rumor of it," said he. The cab had driven up, and I left him. Lower Burke Street proved to be a line of fine houses lying in the vague borderland between Notting Hill and Kensington. The particular one at which my cabman pulled up had an air of smug and demure respectability in its old-fashioned iron railings, its massive folding door, and its shining brasswork. All was in keeping with a solemn butler, who appeared framed in the pink radiance of a tinted electric light behind him. "Yes, Mr. Culverton Smith is in, Dr. Watson. Very good, sir. I will take up your card." My humble name and title did not appear to impress Mr. Culverton Smith. Through the half-open door I heard a high, petulant, penetrating voice. "Who is this person? What does he want? Dear me, Staples, how often have I said that I am not to be disturbed in my hours of study?" There came a gentle flow of soothing explanation from the butler. "Well, I won't see him, Staples. I can't have my work interrupted like this. I'm not at home. Say so. Tell him to come in the morning if he really must see me. Again, the gentle murmur. Well, give him that message. He can come in the morning, or he can stay away. My work must not be hindered. I thought of Holmes, tossing upon his bed of sickness and counting the minutes, perhaps until I could bring him to me. Perhaps until I could bring help to him. It was not a time to stand upon ceremony. His life depended on my promptness. Before the apologetic butler had delivered his message, I had pushed past him and was in the room. With a shrill cry of anger, a man rose from the reclining chair beside the fire. I saw a great yellow face, coarse-grained and greasy, with heavy double chin and two sullen, menacing gray eyes which glared at me from under tufted and sandy brows. A high bald head had a small velvet smoking cap poised coquettishly upon one side of its pink curve. The skull was of enormous capacity, and yet as I looked down I saw to my amazement that the figure of the man was small and frail, twisted in the shoulders and back like one who has suffered from rickets in his childhood. "What's this?" he cried in a high, screaming voice. "What is the meaning of this intrusion? Didn't I send you word that I would see you tomorrow morning?" "I am sorry," said I, "but the matter cannot be delayed. Mr. Sherlock Holmes—" The mention of my friend's name had an extraordinary effect upon the little man. The look of anger passed in an instant from his face. His features became tense and alert. "Have you come from Holmes?" he asked. "I have just left him." "What about Holmes? How is he?" "He is desperately ill. That is why I have come." The man motioned me to a chair and turned to resume his own. As he did so, I caught a glimpse of his face in the mirror over the mantelpiece. I could have sworn that it was set in a malicious and abominable smile. Yet I persuaded myself that it must have been some nervous contraction which I had surprised, for he turned to me an instant later with genuine concern upon his features. So intrigued into the plot suspense. Yes, I know. I'm enjoying this one. You got a sick Holmes, and he's like, all right, you need to go to this specific doctor, but you have to convince him because he has a grudge against me. I love it. I'm ready. "I'm sorry to hear this," said he. "I only know Mr. Holmes through some business dealings which we have had, but I have every respect for his talents and his character. He is an amateur of crime, as I am of disease. For him, the villain; for me, the microbe. There are my prisons," he continued, pointing to a row of bottles and jars which stood upon a side table. "Among these gelatin cultivations, some of the very worst offenders in the world are now doing time. It was on account of your special knowledge that Mr. Holmes desired to see you. He has a high opinion of you, and thought that you were the man in London who could help him." The little man stared, and the jaunty smoking cap slid to the floor. "Why?" he asked. "Why should Mr. Holmes think that I could help him in his trouble?" "Because of your knowledge of Eastern diseases." "But why should he think that this disease, which he has contracted, is Eastern?" "Because in some professional inquiry he has been working among Chinese sailors down in the docks." Mr. Culverton Smith smiled pleasantly and picked up his smoking cap. "Oh, that's it, is it?" said he. "I trust the matter is not so grave as you suppose. How long has he been ill?" "About 3 days." "Is he delirious?" "Occasionally." "Tut, tut. This sounds serious. It would be inhuman not to answer his call. I very much resent any interruption to my work, Dr. Watson, but this case is certainly exceptional. I will come with you at once." I remembered Holmes' injunction. "I have another appointment," said I. "Very good. I will go alone. I have a note of Mr. Holmes's address. You can rely upon my being there within half an hour at most." It was with a sinking heart that I re-entered Holmes's bedroom. For all that I knew, the worst might have happened in my absence. To my enormous relief, he had improved greatly in the interval. His appearance was as ghastly as ever, but all trace of delirium had left him, and he spoke in a feeble voice. It is true, but with even more than his usual crispness and lucidity. "Well?" Did you see him, Watson? Yes, he is coming. Admirable, Watson, admirable. You are the best of messengers. He wished to return with me. That would never do, Watson. That would be obviously impossible. Did he ask what ailed me? I told him about the Chinese at the East End. Exactly. Well, Watson, you have done all that a good friend could. You can now disappear from the scene. I must wait and hear his opinion, Holmes. Of course you must. But I have reasons to suppose that this opinion would be very much more frank and valuable if he imagines that we are alone. There is just room behind the head of my bed, Watson. My dear Holmes, I fear there is no alternative, Watson. The room does not lend itself to concealment, which is as well, as it is the less likely to arouse suspicion. But just here, Watson, I fancy that it could be done. Suddenly he sat up, with a rigid intentness upon his haggard face. There are the wheels, Watson. Quick! If you love me. And don't budge, whatever happens, do you hear? Don't speak, don't move. Just listen with all your ears. Then, in an instant, his sudden access of strength departed, and his masterful, purposeful talk droned away into a low, vague murmurings of the semi-delirious man. From the hiding-place into which I had been so swiftly hustled, I heard the footfalls upon the stair, with the opening and the closing of the bedroom door. Then, to my surprise, there came a long silence, broken only by the heavy breathings and gaspings of the sick man. I could imagine that our visitor was standing by the bedside, looking down at the sufferer. At last, that strange hush was broken. "Holmes!" he cried. "Holmes!" in the insistent tone of one who awakens a sleeper. "Can't you hear me, Holmes?" There was a rustling, as if he had been shaken the sick man roughly by the shoulder. "Is that you, Mr. Smith?" Holmes whispered. "I hardly dared hope that you would come." The other laughed. "I should imagine not," he said. "And yet, you see, I am here. Coals of fire, Holmes, coals of fire." "It's very good of you. Very noble of you. I appreciate your special knowledge." The visitor sniggered. "You do. You are, fortunately, the only man in London who does. Do you know what is the matter with you?" "The same," said Holmes. "Ah, you recognize the symptoms?" "Only too well." "Well, I shouldn't be surprised, Holmes. I shouldn't be surprised if it were the same. A bad outlook for you, if it is. Poor Victor was a dead man on the 4th day. A strong, hardy young fellow. It was certainly, as you said, very surprising that he should have contracted an out-of-the-way Asiatic disease in the heart of London. A disease, too, of which I have made such a very special study. Singular coincidence, Holmes. Very smart of you to notice it, but rather uncharitable to suggest that it was cause and effect." "I knew that you did it." "Oh, did you? Oh, you did you? Well, you couldn't prove it, anyhow. But what do you think of yourself, spreading reports about me like that, and then crawling to me for help the moment you are in trouble? What sort of a game is that, eh?" I heard the rasping, labored breathing of the sick man. "Give me the water," he rasped. "You're precious near your end, my friend, but I don't want you to go till I have had a word with you. That's why I give you water. There. Don't slop it about. That's right. Can you understand what I say?" Holmes groaned. "Do what you can for me. Let bygones be bygones. Oops. Oopsie poopsie. Wrong person. "Do what you can for me. Let bygones be bygones," he whispered. "I'll put the words out of my head. I swear I will. Only cure me, and I'll forget it." "Forget what?" "Well, about Victor Savage's death. You as good as admitted just now that you had done it. I'll forget it." "You can forget it or remember it, just as you like. I don't see you in the witness box. Quite another shaped box, my good Holmes, I assure you. It matters nothing to me that you should know how my nephew died. It's not him we are talking about. It's you." "Yes, yes." "The fellow who came for me. I've forgotten his name. Said that you contracted it down in the East End among the sailors." "I could only account for it so." "You're proud of your brains, Holmes, are you not? Think yourself smart, don't you? You came across someone who was smarter this time. Now cast your mind back, Holmes. Can you think of no other way you could have got this thing? I can't think. My mind is gone. For heaven's sake, help me. Yes, I will help you. I'll help you to understand just where you are and how you got there. I'd like you to know before you die. Give me something to ease my pain. Painful, is it? Yes, the coolies used to do some squealing towards the end. Take you as a cramp, I fancy. Yes, it is a cramp. Well, you can hear what I say anyhow. Listen now. Can you remember any unusual incident in your life just about the time your symptoms began? No, nothing. Think again. I'm too ill to think. Well then, I'll help you. Did anything come by post? By post? A box, by chance? I'm fainting. I'm gone. Listen, Holmes. There was a sound as if he was shaking the dying man, and it was all that I could do to hold myself quiet in my hiding place. You must hear me. You shall hear me. Do you understand? A box? An ivory box. It came on Wednesday. You opened it. Do you remember? Yes, I opened it. There was a sharp spring inside it, some sort of joke. It was no joke, as you will find to your cost. You fool. You would have it, and you have got it. Who asked you to cross my path? If you had left me alone, I would not have hurt you. I remember, gasped Holmes. The spring. It drew blood. This box. This on the table. This very one, by George, and it may as well leave the room in my pocket. There goes your last shred of evidence. But you have the truth now, Holmes, and you can die with the knowledge that I killed you. You knew too much of the fate of Victor Savage, so I have sent you to share it. You are very near your end, Holmes. I will sit here, and I will watch you die. Holmes's voice had sunk to an almost inaudible whisper. What was that? Said Smith. Turn up the gas. Ah, the shadows begin to fall, do they? Yes, I will turn it up, and I may see you the better. He crossed the room, and the light suddenly brightened. Is there any other little service that I can do for you, my friend? A match and a cigarette. I nearly called out in my joy and my amazement. He was speaking in in his natural voice, a little weak, perhaps, but the very voice I knew. There was a long pause, and I felt that Culverton Smith was standing in silent amazement, looking down at his companion. What's the meaning of this? I heard him say at last, in a dry, raspy voice. The best way to successfully acting the part is to be it, said Holmes. I gave you my word that for 3 days I have tasted neither food nor drink until you were good enough to pour me out that glass of water. But it is the tobacco which I find most irksome. Ah, here are some cigarettes. I heard the striking of a match. That is very much better. Do I hear the step of a friend? There were footfalls outside. The door opened, and Inspector Morton appeared. All is in order, and this is your man, said Holmes. The officer gave the usual cautions. I arrest you on the charge of the murder of one Victor Savage, he concluded. And, you might add, one attempted murder of one Sherlock Holmes, remarked my friend with a chuckle. To save an invalid trouble, Inspector Culverton Smith was good enough to give our signal by turning up the gas. By the way, the prisoner has a small box in the right-hand pocket of his coat, which it would be as well to remove. Thank you. I would handle it gingerly if I were you. Put it down there. It may play its part in the trial. There was a sudden rush and a scuffle, followed by the clash of iron and a cry of pain. You'll only get yourself hurt, said the inspector. Stand still, will you? There was a click of the closing handcuffs. A nice trap, cried the high, snarling voice. It will bring you into the dock, Holmes, not me. He asked me to come here to cure him. I was sorry for him, and I came. Now he will pretend, no doubt, that I have said anything which he may invent, which will corroborate his insane suspicions. You can lie as you like, Holmes. My word is always as good as yours." "Good heavens!" cried Holmes. "I had totally forgotten him. My dear Watson, I owe you 1,000 apologies. To think that I should have overlooked you. I need not introduce you to Mr. Culverton Smith, since I understand that you met somewhat earlier in the evening. Have you the cab now? I will follow you when I am dressed, for I may be of some use at the station." "I never needed it more," said Holmes, as he refreshed himself with a glass of claret and some biscuits of the intervals of the toilet. "However, as you know, my habits are irregular, and such a feat means less to me than to most men. It was very essential that I should impress Mrs. Hudson with the reality of my condition, since she was to convey it to you, and you in turn to him. You won't be offended, Watson? You will realize that among your many talents dissimulation finds no place, and that if you had shared my secret you would never have been able to impress Smith with the urgent necessity of his presence, which was the vital point of the whole scheme. Knowing his vindictive nature, I was perfectly certain that he would come to look upon his handiwork." "But your appearance, Holmes, your ghastly face. 3 days of absolute fast does not improve one's beauty, Watson. For the rest, there is nothing much a sponge may not cure. With Vaseline upon one's forehead, belladonna in one's eye, rouge upon the cheekbones, and crusts of beeswax round one's lips, a very satisfying effect can be produced. Malingering is a subject upon which I have sometimes thought of writing a monograph. A little occasional talk about half-crowns, oysters, or any other extraneous subject produces a pleasing effect of delirium." "But why would you not let me near you, since there was in truth no infection?" "Can you ask, my dear Watson? Do you imagine that I have no respect for your medical talents? Could I fancy that your astute judgment would pass a dying man who, however weak, had no rise of pulse or temperature? At 4 yards I could deceive you. If I failed to do so, who would bring my Smith within my grasp? No, Watson, I would not touch that box. You can just see if you look at it sideways there was the sharp spring, like a viper's tooth emerges as you open it. I dare say it was by some device that poor savage, who stood between this monster and a reversion, was done to death. My correspondence, however, is, as you know, a varied one, and I am somewhat upon my guard against any packet which reach me. It was clear to me, however, that by pretending that he had really succeeded in his design, I might surprise a confession. That pretense I have carried out with the thoroughness of the true artist. Thank you, Watson. You must help me on with my coat. When we have finished at the police station, I think that something nutritious at Simpson's would not be out of place." And that is the end of The Adventure of the Dying Detective. Okay, so I think this one is my favorite one among all of the short stories. I love it. I love it. We're getting like the end of a case, so we're not actually like following along. And Watson just hears that Holmes is super, super sick, and he gets there and he looks disgusting and is super weak. And Holmes is like, "No, you cannot give me medical advice. I need medical advice from one specific person who isn't a doctor but is a botanist." Is that what he is? I don't know. Um, and you have to go at 6 o'clock, which is 2 hours from now. And he's like, "Well, okay." He's like, "And you must not go with him. You need to go separately." And Watson's like, "All right." So he does this, and he goes there, and he's very concerned for Holmes, and convinces the doctor to come, and Culverton Smith. And Culverton Smith, oh, well, Watson gets back early. He hides behind Holmes's bed, and Culverton Smith arrives and pretty much says that he's the one who killed his nephew, and he is also killing Holmes right now, and he's so excited to watch Holmes die. But that's not what was happening at all. Holmes wasn't poisoned. He just hadn't eaten or had anything to drink for 3 days, and then added a little bit more effects to make himself look more disgusting. It's pretty great. It's pretty great. But that's where we're gonna end today. We will continue on with his last bow next time. So yes, I hope you all have a great evening. I hope to see you very soon. If I don't see you next time, I hope to see you even sooner. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.